The soldier held a bow in his hands and pulled the bowstring in order to shoot. He took good aim. His face was calm and serene. The man was just doing his job. Finally, the archer found his target and so he fired. All this happened in a matter of seconds. The arrow flew at great speed over the heads of the soldiers in the same red military uniform. She hit a young guy who was shielding the queen from a deadly arrow. He himself didn't know why he did it. The girl was dumbfounded with horror while the guy thought that his mind was clouded by the eye of the silver moon. His strength began to leave him. At that moment, he admitted to himself that he simply wanted to protect his queen's smile. Few people noticed this sacrifice because events of a much larger scale were taking place. The enemy had besieged the royal palace and was already making significant progress. All this was observed from the side by the ruler, who was sitting on the back of a large elephant. The servant turned to his king and reported that everything was already ready. The man was pleased with what he heard, because in the end, even the arrogant country of the silver moon would fall under his onslaught. The next moment, he loudly ordered his subordinates not to leave anyone alive. For some time before this, the queen sat in the spacious throne room. The siege of the castle had already begun, as evidenced by the explosions outside and the trembling of the earth. The girl looked calm. She seemed to have resigned herself to what was happening around her, and therefore sat completely alone, waiting for the end. Unlike their queen, the servants were terribly frightened and tried to run away as far as possible, forgetting about their duties. But the main character was not like that. He ran in the opposite direction and thought that these servants were stupid people who did not have a drop of loyalty. The guy tried his best to run as fast as possible, thinking that no matter what, he had to save that very thing. Finally, he stopped at a large door, and for some time he did not dare to open it because he was afraid that it was already too late. The next moment, he plucked up his courage and opened them. Immediately, he was blinded by a bright light. In this room, there were many jewels and gold, at the sight of which the guy was dumbfounded and opened his mouth wide. The satisfied protagonist looked at the gold bars and said that he had come to save them from the savages. Besides, for him, it was a great chance to earn some good money. Put the gold in the bag. The guy said that life was full of accidents, and even if the country was destroyed, he was the only one who should live well. After some time, the guy left the treasury, and seeing the lifeless bodies of the servants in the corridor, he realized that he had been too late, and therefore he had to hurry. The main character ran along the winding corridor without letting go of his prey. He thought only about keeping the gold coins. Suddenly, the guy saw several enemy soldiers running nearby in front of him. Fortunately, the main hero managed to hide in time without attracting their attention. The guy looked at the soldiers and couldn't believe that he had miscalculated, because the invaders should have arrived much later, and he would have had time to get away from here. Suddenly, he assumed that someone had opened the gates for them, which made the guy angry. Then the main character thought about how he could escape from the palace, because he couldn't fight, and there was nowhere to hide, because the soldiers would search everything around. Finally, an idea came to his mind, and he thought that when the queen surrendered, he could join her. The guy praised himself and was pleased that he always found a solution. The treasures had to be left for a while. After that, the guy went in search of the queen. The main character quietly opened one of the many doors and, without entering the room, carefully looked around. Suddenly, someone swung his sword sharply, trying to attack the guy. The main character was very scared and was ready to say goodbye to life, but the blade stopped at the very last moment. It belonged to a queen who, mistaking her servant for an enemy, tried to kill him in order to protect herself. The frightened boy asked Her Majesty not to rush, because he was her loyal subordinate. The girl was surprised because she heard that everyone had already fled a long time ago, and so she asked the guy what he was doing here. The guy immediately came to his senses and remembered why he was looking for the queen. He bowed respectfully and said that he was there to act as an advisor to the queen. The girl took this without much enthusiasm, because she thought it was too late to listen to the advisors. But the guy explained that he wanted to help Her Majesty surrender. The main character tried to convince the queen that in this way, they would have a chance to survive. But the girl was skeptical about this idea and asked the guy if he was serious, to which he replied in the affirmative. At the same time, the guy silently asked the girl to give in and, as if using telepathy, tried to instill this idea in her. But the queen loudly and decisively declared that she could not do this. What he heard was like lightning striking the guy, and he thought that Her Majesty had gone crazy. The main character could not believe that he had miscalculated again and could end up dying. He did not want to end up in hell. The girl began to grieve because her great kingdom, which had flourished since its founding by her ancestors, instantly fell at the hands of savages and asked at what point she had made a mistake. The guy was surprised that the fates of the rulers were so unpredictable, because the girl, being an illegitimate heir, was now the queen of an almost destroyed state. Suddenly, the queen declared that she would go to heaven, but the servant still had a chance, so he could go and surrender to the enemy. The boy was stunned by these words. Soon the main character pulled himself together and thought that he shouldn't panic but needed to find a way out of this situation. The guy figured that if he was left alone, his probability of dying would be 97.2%. If he does not give up and tries to escape, he will die with a probability of 83.6%. If he escapes alone, the probability of dying will be 66.9%. Well, if he surrenders along with the queen, he will be able to survive with a 50% probability. The choice was obvious, and so the guy felt that he had to persuade the queen by any means possible, after which he suddenly fell to his knees. The main character confidently stated that if the girl was not going to give up, then he would not do it either. At first, the girl was surprised by this answer, because she did not expect such devotion from a simple servant. But soon her face broke into a smile and her cheeks turned red with embarrassment. Her Majesty approached the guy and unexpectedly took him by the hand. The girl said sheepishly that although the guy did not possess great strength, he was a loyal subject of his country. Suddenly she remembered that God had once said that at the moment of crisis, a loyal subject would come to them who would save the state. The main character asked his queen if she believed these words, and thought to himself that the girl was either naive or a fool. Her Majesty smiled and replied that she believed in the words that were given by her ancestors. The main character was amazed because he had never seen such a sincere smile on the queen. The guy couldn't look away and silently looked at her, thinking about how beautiful the girl was when she smiled. The queen said that the servant was the only one who stayed with her until the end, and for this she thanked him. Suddenly, Her Majesty's pendant lit up, reflecting a ray of light. The protagonist immediately recognized this jewel. It was the eye of the silver moon that belonged to the royal family. The guy thought that he wanted to get hold of this relic to the point of madness. Suddenly, the queen admitted that initially she thought the servant was a cunning and greedy man who was only interested in wealth. The main character, although he thought about something else, began to assure the girl that he was just a subject who followed his queen. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden roar. The enemies were already here and were breaking into the throne room, which frightened the guy and his queen. In an instant, the door was broken down and several soldiers ran into the room. Seeing the queen, they began to intend to seize her. Several subjects came to help Her Majesty. One of them asked the queen to run away quickly. The next moment, a dying cry was heard and splashes of scarlet blood flew around. The queen turned to the main character and said that he could go and surrender. The guy began to carefully consider these words, but suddenly the girl asked if he wanted to prove his loyalty. Her Highness drew her sword and said that the servant who died with his queen would prove that he was a loyal subject. The girl went to her enemies in order to personally take part in the defense of the palace. The main character silently watched her, thinking about what he should have done. He was annoyed and indignant that he had miscalculated again. Suddenly, something caught the guy's attention and made him very worried. In the corridor, he noticed an enemy soldier who was about to shoot the queen with a bow. The weapon was already loaded with a sharp arrow, and the enemy himself was aiming at Her Majesty. The main character did not know what he should do, and so he stood silently and watched from the side. He looked after the queen, who fearlessly went to her last battle. The guy understood what he had to do, but he was afraid of it, which made him indignant and angry at what was happening to him. Suddenly, he remembered the girl's recent words, that by dying with the queen, he would prove that he was a loyal subject. These words gave the main character confidence, and he was still able to make a choice. The guy rushed to his queen, trying to save her. At the very last moment, he managed to cover Her Majesty with his body and take the attack of the treacherous arrow. Blood splashed out of the wound, but the main character was not bothered by this, because the most important thing was that he managed to save his queen. Her Majesty was stunned by surprise, because everything happened in the blink of an eye. The injuries received early were serious, from which the main character began to cough up blood. The servant no longer had the strength to stand on his feet, so he began to fall to the floor, while the queen tried to hold on to her protector. The girl was amazed that the guy was not afraid to sacrifice his life for the sake of the ruler. Coughing up blood, the servant thought about what he was doing and how he decided to do such a thing. Finally, he turned to the queen and asked her to put the eye of the silver moon in his grave. After all, he had to have at least some treasure on his way to the other world. He also asked for forgiveness from the gold and silver that he failed to protect. The queen looked at the dying boy and said that she would soon follow him, and they would see each other again in another world. The guy looked at Her Majesty with all his might and thought about whether another world really existed. Soon the protagonist's eyes closed and everything was shrouded in darkness. He could not believe that he would die like this and hoped that he would not go to hell. Suddenly, from the darkness, someone's voice began to be heard louder and louder, ordering the guy to wake up and get up. The main character immediately opened his eyes as if he had a nightmare. In front of him, he saw an entity that resembled a ghost with a scary face. He abruptly headed towards the guy, which scared him, and he covered himself with his hands, but the spirit only passed right through him. When the danger had passed, the main character decided to open his eyes again and look around. Everything around looked as if this place had long since been abandoned by life, and all around were disembodied ghosts. The boy recognized this place. It was his kingdom, but now it was destroyed and inhabited only by ugly spirits. Suddenly, the same mysterious voice addressed the main character, calling him a loyal subject. The guy looked around and saw an unfamiliar girl behind him who was ordering him to get up. She looked intently at the protagonist and again asked him to rise up and save the country. The guy was very surprised that the stranger called him a loyal subject and addressed him with such an order. The stranger extended her hand to the main character and, calling him a loyal subject, asked him to get up. The guy didn't understand what was happening to him and assumed that he was dead. The girl looked at him with her bright eyes and answered directly that he was dead. The main character immediately asked if he had gone to hell and suggested that the girl was the devil. The stranger shook her head and said that it was neither heaven nor hell, but just another world. The guy didn't understand what the girl was talking about and suspected that this was some new kind of charlatanism. The stranger interrupted his thoughts and suggested that the guy first look around. Everything around was destroyed and looked abandoned. Where life had been in full swing, now only disembodied spirits wandered from side to side. The sky was still blue and serene, but even here, ghosts were now in charge. The girl said again that this place was not hell yet, but the main character was only interested in what the hell it was. Suddenly, the stranger announced that the kingdom in which the guy lived had fallen, and the country had come to an end. The main character could not believe that the kingdom that existed for more than 500 years was mercilessly destroyed this morning. Soon tears appeared in the boy's eyes from grief and the realization of what had happened. He was very sad that his real estate, land, and treasures were now definitely gone. The girl said that even if the enemies had been stopped, the kingdom would have fallen during the next invasion, because the fall of the state was inevitable. This did not cheer up the main character in any way. He was still grieving over the fact that all his fortune that he had accumulated for so long had disappeared without a trace. Suddenly, the stranger said that the guy had a chance to get everything back. The main character immediately calmed down and began to listen attentively to the girl. She said that the founder of the kingdom had once made a pact with God, which consisted of the possibility of restoring the country once when it was on the verge of extinction. The guy was very surprised and could not believe that the nonsense that the queen had recently told him turned out to be true. The girl continued to say that since the royal dynasty was guilty of the destruction of the state, unfortunately she could not give them a chance to recover. But she could give the opportunity to do this not to the descendants of the founder of the kingdom, but to the last remaining loyal subject. The main characters happily accepted this idea and assumed that she was now advising him to find this loyal subject. The girl stated that there was no need for this, since the main character was the kingdom's last hope. There was a moment of silence. Our heroes looked at each other in bewilderment. Finally, the stranger said that it was the guy who defended the queen to the last, and therefore now the fate of the kingdom depended entirely on him. The guy remembered the last moment of his life and the face of his queen who was with him until the end. The main character decided to discuss the topic of which of the people was the closest, but the stranger did not understand what the point was. The guy timidly explained that he was not a completely loyal subject, and that was the problem. The girl did not understand what he was talking about because she knew that he was the only one who remained with the queen and, as proof of his devotion, protected her from the arrow. The guy explained that there was a misunderstanding because he went to the palace to take the treasure and missed the opportunity to escape and only then saved the queen. For a moment, he stopped his story. It seemed that the guy was ashamed of his actions. Finally, he continued to say that he himself did not understand why he protected the queen. These words shocked the stranger. She clarified that while trying to take the treasure, the guy was unable to escape from the palace and died by mistake along with the queen. The guy was ashamed of himself, but he honestly confirmed the girl's guess. The stranger was very angry and disappointed that the main character turned out to be just trash. The guy was offended by such cruel words, but the lady angel asked him to behave more quietly because she needed to double-check the contract. after which she took out a large scroll. It stated that a subject who died alongside the ruler during the destruction of the kingdom was to become a loyal subject. The main character was very surprised and did not understand what kind of loyal subject he could be. The girl thought that this whole situation was very strange because the image of a loyal subject was different from the beautiful picture of the kingdom, so there was confusion. She was very disappointed and called the guy a treacherous person and said that he lived a hopeless life. The angel thought that everything was over, but assumed that she would be able to find a worthy person by the time the kingdom was founded. Suddenly, she snapped her fingers and said that nothing could be done, and now she was going to show the guy his task. Around the main character, magical inscriptions appeared that formed a text. It was divided into separate blocks that described one of the periods of the kingdom's history. The main character was very surprised by what he saw and believed that this was divine power. The angel again turned to the guy, calling him a treacherous person. He said that he didn't really like this kind of treatment. Then the girl categorically stated that he needed to live with dignity. Then she believed that everything that was happening to the guy was his destiny, predetermined by God. But the main character was skeptical about this and believed that the angel was a charlatan. The girl continued to say that now it was the guy who would have to save the kingdom, which surprised him greatly. But suddenly he thought that if he could save the state, he would be able to restore all his property. The guy started to think about it. On one side of the scale was the opportunity to return the property and gain high status, and on the other side was the uncertainty about the mission and his weak physical strength. He considered that the risks were too great, and besides, he did not know all the details, so he assumed that with more favorable conditions he could come to an agreement. The main character turned to the Lady Angel in order to find out everything in more detail and make a choice. But the girl did not listen to him and ordered the guy to return to the past thanks to the grace of the goddess of motherhood and help cope with the crisis situations in the kingdom so that it could acquire a new look. The angel continued to say that depending on how he handles his mission, this place will become heaven or hell, so she asked the protagonist to save the kingdom with his loyalty. The guy tried to object, but the girl said that he was included in the contract with God, which meant that his mission had already begun. A system window appeared in front of the guy, in which he had to click on the item, Attack of the Tiger Tribe. The main character resigned himself to his fate and decided to think first of all about his property. The next moment, information regarding the mission to change history appeared before him, which was to protect the blood of the silver moon by any means necessary. After the guy pressed the continue button, a window appeared in front of him, warning that if the mission to change history fails, he will die and the kingdom will be destroyed. The main character was scared. He had a bad feeling about it, and so he asked the angel if she was trying to use him because he was just an ordinary person. The girl asked him not to worry, after which she suddenly clapped her hands. She said that in any case the guy would turn into a ghost and be tormented in hell, and suggested that he get to this place right now because she could organize everything. Hearing this, the boy said that since childhood, he hated adventures and learning something new, but most of all, he hated ghosts. He immediately agreed to the terms of the mission and pressed the yes button, after which everything around shook as if from an earthquake. Stronger vibrations destroyed this world and loud sounds forced the guy to cover his ears. After the last stones had fallen, a dense forest with tall trees appeared before the guy. The main character was very surprised by such a sharp change in the surrounding world and now did not understand where he was. The rays of the bright sun barely penetrated the dense crowns of the tall trees. The main character nervously looked around and called out to the angel lady, asking her to explain what had happened. Suddenly someone asked why the guy was turning his head like that. He immediately noticed that this voice was different from the voice of an angel. The main character was very surprised to see the one who owned this unfamiliar voice. The unfamiliar man took a step towards the guy without any fear. It was a girl who wore thin clothes made of animal skins and decorations made of stones and feathers. The main character was very surprised and out of surprise called her a savage out loud. The girl asked what it meant, after which she began to be indignant that the guy was standing there and talking some nonsense. She rudely asked the guy to shut up, otherwise he would scare away all the game. The guy didn't like this rudeness, and he wondered if there were laws in this world that punished insults. Suddenly the girl focused on the rustling sound she heard nearby and thought that her prey was approaching. The main character noticed the color of the savage's eyes and was very surprised. The girl had the eyes of the silver moon and she was definitely of royal blood. The guy did not understand how a savage could have such a color of eyes. The stranger was very angry because, despite the fact that she ordered the guy to be quiet, he still continued to make noise. Suddenly, the guy was struck by lightning, as he realized that this situation could turn the entire political history of his state upside down. At that moment, the voice of the angel lady addressed him and asked if he heard her. The guy looked around and asked himself where she was. The girl replied that there was no need to panic because now she was inside his consciousness. Suddenly, a small projection of the angel lady appeared in front of him. The main character immediately asked what was happening here and where he was. The girl replied that they were in peace before the founding of the kingdom. The guy assumed that he had gone into the past. Angel confirmed this but added that it was not a simple past. She explained that from that moment on, the guy was obliged to protect the wild girl with all his might, since she was the distant ancestor of his queen. The main character was shocked by what he heard and could not believe that this barbarian was the ancestor of the royal dynasty. The guy turned to the angel and said that this could not have happened because their ancestors descended from the moon and all descendants came from the goddess of the silver moon. The girl directly stated that it was just a myth and the goddess of the silver moon did not exist. She also added that the story about people descending from the moon was also a complete fabrication. The main character could not believe it, but the angel said again that faith in the goddess of the silver moon was heresy, and most of the inhabitants of the kingdom worshipped heretics. The guy was very saddened by this fact, because it turned out that the donations he made were in vain, and his money went nowhere. The angel didn't even think about cheering up the guy. She rudely said that she didn't care at all about his feelings, because she realized that he professed a false religion. She asked the main character to come to his senses and take care of his duties. The guy was indignant that the girl allowed herself to ask him for something after she heard him, and added that now it was hard for him because he had lost a lot of money. To this, the angel advised the main character not to lose his vigilance because the enemy was approaching them. Hearing this, the guy got scared and immediately came to his senses. He rose to his feet and stood listening to every rustle that came from the forest. The savage was unhappy because she was looking forward to a good hunt, but the guy ruined everything. After which she turned to the main character, called him Karibisu, and asked him to prepare a weapon. Karibisu meant and didn't understand whether the girl was addressing him specifically. The savage girl burst into tears and calling the guy Karibisu again, asked why he hadn't answered. He asked if the girl had approached him. She replied that of course she was addressing him, because there was no one else here except the two of them. The main character thought about the fact that although he had not seen this girl for the first time, she addressed him informally. This gave him some thoughts, and so he looked at his hands. He didn't recognize them because before his body was thin and his arms were thin. One could say that the guy was skinny before, but now he has become a muscular man. Finally, he realized that he was not in his own body, but in the body of one of the savages. The angel explained that she moved the guy into the body of a person who lived in this world so that he could interfere with history. The guy did not understand why this was necessary. The angel said that the kingdom of the silver moon had experienced a huge number of crises over time, but there was no country in the world that could fall so easily in one day. All the reasons for the fall accumulated from the very foundation, which eventually led to destruction, and intervention in history was the only way to save the country. The guy couldn't understand how it was possible to save the country and change history. The angel explained that the girl standing in front of the guy could seem like an aggressive and uneducated savage. According to the original story, she was captured and the village she lived in was destroyed. For 20 years, this girl was a slave of the invading tribe and lived hellish days and obligations to them. Hearing this, the main character became upset and did not want this story to be repeated. The next moment, a suspicious rustling sound came from the forest, causing the guy to immediately grab his weapon. The savage woman, seeing the enemy, recognized him and looked at him with contempt. Her enemies were several men from the tiger tribe. The chief of them greeted his neighbors. The boy asked the angel if these were their enemies. She confirmed this and said that they called themselves the tiger tribe, while the girl belonged to the bear claw tribe. The savage loudly declared that this territory belonged to her tribe and asked how men dared to come here. The main character did not understand why the girl showed aggression from the very beginning. Angel explained that hostile relations had developed between these two tribes. The leader was perplexed and asked since when this place began to belong to the people of the bear claws, after which he said that this was the first time he had heard of such a thing. The man also did not understand how it was possible to divide the forest and said that it was complete nonsense. At the same time, an unpleasant smell came from his mouth. Having sensed it, the main character immediately assumed that this man had never brushed his teeth in his entire life. The girl reminded her enemies that they had made a pact on the day of a big rainstorm, and therefore was indignant that the man had decided to break the oath given in front of the sacred tree. The leader knew about this, but said that the agreement was concluded between the village elders. But when one of the leaders disappeared, the deal became invalid. The girl did not understand what he was getting at. The next moment, the man declared that right now his tribe was destroying the girl's village. The savage was very angry and indignant because the tiger tribe had decided to break the agreement that had been concluded only recently. The main character thought that things were heading towards a fight that could not be avoided, but he also understood that he and the girl were in the minority. On top of that, the enemies had more weapons, but they only had small stone axes. Suddenly, the man turned to the girl, calling her Yari Soyon, and offered her to become his bride because he liked warlike girls. The savage immediately refused this. After this, the leader turned to the main character. The guy did not expect this, which is why he was a little taken aback. The man said that he didn't want any senseless bloodshed at all, and so the guy could go and not worry about what would happen to the girl. The main character seriously thought about these words, and it seemed that he was about to accept this offer. Suddenly, Yari Soyan turned to the boy in an alarmed voice and asked him to look in the direction of her village. In the distance, columns of thick black smoke were visible, and the uncontrolled fire had already reached the forest and was burning everything in its path. The protagonist thought about how he would like to hear these words in his past life, but he had to persuade the queen to give in. The guy continued to think that if he accepted the leader's offer, he could avoid the worst, but Angel forbade him to do so. She explained that if Yari Soyan was captured, the foundation of the kingdom would be delayed for hundreds of years, and a loyal subject needed to prevent the destruction of the country by influencing the time of its foundation. The main character laughed at the fact that Angel called him a greedy man, and then suddenly a loyal subject. These words took the girl by surprise, and she tried to justify herself by saying that she had no other choice. After that, she showed the information about the task and asked the guy to pay attention to the last point, which said that in case of failure, the main character would die. The guy was very surprised because earlier, the angel said that everything would be fine. The girl explained that if he had refused the task, he would have turned into a ghost anyway. That is, not completing the mission now, or refusing it at the very beginning, would ultimately lead to one result. Therefore, the guy did not lose anything when he accepted this task. The guy thought that there was a catch somewhere here, and looking at the angel, he thought that this creature was still the devil. The leader of the villains got tired of waiting for an answer and, threatening the guy, asked whether he would fight them or leave the girl and disappear into the sunset. The main character thought again. Yari Soyon, not having heard the desired answer, turned to the guy and assumed that he intended to run away. The main character looked at the girl and asked her for forgiveness, because he believed that, first of all, he should have thought about himself. Yari Soyon was shocked by such an answer, from which she was dumbfounded and could not utter a word, but only looked at the guy as if he were a traitor. The leader praised the guy for the right decision, after which he turned to the girl and offered her some fun. The protagonist clutched his stone axe tightly in his hand, as if he was angry and regretting his choice. The man asked Yari Soyan not to worry, because the representatives of the tiger tribe were very faithful and strong husbands. He also added that the men of his tribe would happily cook for their wives, and he would raise their children to be warriors. The next moment, a stone axe flew into the back of the head of the villains, causing blood to spray in all directions. Everyone was immediately surprised and turned to the main character, because it was he who threw the axe. The guy was also surprised that he managed to do it, and thought that this barbarian's body was no joke. Since he was a person who had never done any physical exercise, he felt such strength for the first time. The men were indignant that the guy lied to them, but the main character objected because he only said that he should think about himself first. He continued to say that there was no lie told on his part, after which he launched an attack on his enemies. Along the way, he continued to think that he had never felt this way before, and now, having become stronger, he could get rid of enemies like weeds in a field. The men of the tiger tribe were afraid of the guy and tried to retreat, although he had previously been a man of noble blood who had never held an axe in his hands. The angel asked the main character to give everything to his feelings, because the person into whose body he entered was born a warrior. The girl continued to say that the guy simply had to trust his body's instincts, because in any case, it was not his body that was involved in the battle. A moment later, the main character managed to defeat another enemy, leaving him no chance of salvation. Seeing this, the remaining warriors of the tiger tribe were very scared and did not want to repeat the fate of their fallen comrades and therefore decided to run away. The main character watched them go and thought that during the capture of the kingdom, About 200,000 vial types participated, but now this figure seemed ridiculous to the guy. The next moment he rushed in pursuit of the villains, asking along the way where they were in such a hurry. But a well-aimed stone axe instantly stopped one of the men. The main character looked at the defeated enemy and was surprised at his own skill. He thought about the barbarians whom the inhabitants of his kingdom looked at as demons. Small children were gathered for him. Now the guy understood why the aristocrats were panicky, afraid of the savages, but in the end these vile creatures were erased from the pages of history. Yarisoyan approached the main character, rejoicing that she had managed to catch the last villain. The guy smiled and said that it was a good result for a savage. The girl thanked him for his help and admitted that at first she thought that he would leave her and run away. The guy replied that he would do so if he was sure that he would stay alive. After that, the guy thought that of course he meant something completely different. But even if he tried to explain everything to the girl, she still wouldn't understand anything. Suddenly, Yarisoyan remembered her village, which was attacked by a tribe of tigers, and assumed that the people were unable to prevent the attack, and therefore they should go to help. The protagonist asked Mrs. Angela if he needed to protect only this girl. She confirmed it. After that, he asked if they could just run away without saving the village. Angel replied that they could do that, but the more the guy achieves, the better the reward he can get. She also said that the guy was a man who had to save the country, and therefore completing the mission would be pointless if he did not grow and develop. Finally, Angel asked the guy not to forget that the well-being of the kingdom and his life were at stake. The main character remembered the conditions of the mission and thought that he had less than 2 hours left, so he did not understand what he could do in such a limited time. After thinking for a bit, the guy smiled, having already decided what to do next. Yarisoyan didn't understand why Karabisu froze, because they needed to run to the village and save people, but the guy said that he had a different idea. He suggested that the girl run away with him, since there was no certainty that there was anyone left alive in the village. Yarisoyan was very surprised by this proposal, but thought about it for a while. She asked if they would run away, just the two of them. The guy confirmed this. The girl thought for a while again, looking attentively at the guy who was already starting to get nervous. Suddenly the girl said that in that case, they would need to continue the family line, and thought that it was not bad, but she was not thrilled with this idea. The main character was struck by lightning when he heard these words and imagined how it would happen. Yarisoyan was sure that in any case, she and the main character would definitely be able to survive. She then suggested that they could now find a suitable cave and offer prayers to the sacred mountain patron. They could also engage in hunting and gathering. The guy agreed with this. After that, he asked the girl what the problem was, while thinking that he just needed to protect her. Yarisoyan replied that the problem was in the children, or more precisely, that it would be difficult for them if they had them. She assumed that if she got pregnant, the guy would have to hunt alone, and during the hunt he could get hurt or die, and then she would be left alone, and their children would die. The girl then said that it didn't matter how strong they were, because the two of them couldn't survive, so they had to go to the village. The main character was genuinely surprised at how well this savage thought. The angel explained that people gave birth and raised children all over the world, and it did not matter to any mother whether her child was born to a barbarian or a member of a royal family. The protagonist realized that he needed to protect Yarisoyan's blood, which would eventually become the beginning of the royal dynasty, and therefore they could not go to the village right now. Yarisoyan did not know these details, and therefore she was already preparing to go and save people, and called the main character with her. The guy stopped her and said that the girl did not understand the whole situation, and that they now needed to go to another place. Yarisoyan didn't understand what he was talking about. The main character asked if the girl had ever heard of the strategy of breaking into a house without breaking in. Our heroes looked at the blazing fire. Yarisoyan doubted that they would succeed. The guy replied that it was not important because the main thing was to take revenge. Then the girl asked what the strategy of breaking into a house without breaking in meant. The protagonist was surprised that she didn't understand. He explained that the strategy was that when the enemy's attention was focused on a particular target, it was possible to strike from the rear. The angel added that this strategy was the kingdom's main strategy in the fight against the barbarians. The guy noted that since his country was destroyed, this method was useless. The angel objected and explained that the point was that the barbarians who destroyed the kingdom were nomads, and this strategy was not applicable to them. The guy wanted to ask a few more questions, but the angel suggested stopping and discussing everything later. Unexpectedly, the main character turned his attention to Yarisoyan, who was turning to the god of fire and asking him for forgiveness for what she had done, justifying herself by saying that the tiger tribe was the first to break the promise. The guy was perplexed by the fact that the girl calmly killed people but was afraid of fire. Yarasoyan explained that if a person died in a fire, his soul perished with him. The main character tried to say that such a deity did not exist in the world, but the girl immediately shut his mouth and once again asked for forgiveness, this time for the guy's ignorance. She promised that the next time she hunted, she would definitely catch game and present it to the god of fire as an offering. The guy was indignant that it was difficult for him to find a common language with this girl. He didn't understand how anyone could believe in such a thing. The angel reminded that the guy didn't have time for this. He got angry and said that he had to endure all this because of the girl. After this, he turned to Yarisoyan and said that it was time for them to go. The girl looked at the burning village of her enemies and asked if this would be enough. The protagonist replied that the tiger tribe would return to their village to put out the fire. Yarisoyan immediately realized that in this case there would be much fewer enemies in her village, and that was the beauty of the break into a house without breaking in method. After this, the guy thought that he should hurry because he had little time left before completing the mission. He turned to the girl and asked her to run faster because now their enemies would be weakened, and this would be a good chance to break in. Suddenly, Yarisoyan said that at first it seemed to her that the guy only had pumped up muscles, but it turned out that he was quite smart. She also added that when they saved the village, she would like to be alone with him. The guy was taken aback by the surprise and asked the savage to stop encroaching on his virginity at every opportunity. Suddenly, not far from them, our heroes heard the cries of warriors from the tiger tribe who were running to their village and shouting that the god of fire was angry with them. The main character watched them from the bushes and hoped that all the enemies would run away to their village. Yarisoyan assumed that 5-6 enemies would remain in the village. The guy said that he would take on 4 of them, and the savage would take care of the rest. The girl didn't like it. She said that this time she was going to deal with 4 enemies. After some time, our heroes entered the village. Flames were raging everywhere, and lifeless bodies of people were scattered. Looking around, the guy said that judging by the number of victims, the tiger tribe could not resist the villagers. Suddenly, Yarisoyan discovered the body of her murdered father. Screaming in grief, she asked him to open his eyes, but it was too late. The main character turned to the girl and said that they had no time at all to indulge in sadness. Yarisoyan was angry at the tiger tribe because they broke the agreement made in front of the sacred tree and invaded her village despite the promises they made. Holding back tears, she vowed to kill all enemies, giving no one mercy. The enemies still remained in the village and guarded several captured girls. One of the men asked what they could do since there was a fire raging in their village. The second answered that they could stay there, since in any case this place now belonged to them. The main character watched from afar and thought that his enemies were real barbarians, but he was glad that Yarisoyan was not in the place of these girls. The angel said that the man most often killed other men for the sake of enslaving women, and if the guy had not helped the savage, the same fate would have awaited her. The main character looked at the girl and wondered if she knew that her fate had been changed. Meanwhile, one of the captors hit the captive because she did not want to obey him. Seeing this, Yarisoyan became very angry and was ready to rush into battle, but Karabisu asked her to wait. He explained that if the savage attacked now, she could die, so if she wanted to save those girls, she should just wait. Then the guy said that they would attack on his signal and asked the girl to wait for him. Yarisoyan silently agreed with this. The warrior from the tiger tribe continued to mock the girl, who did not give up her attempts to break free and run away. The next moment, the protagonist noticed that one of the opponents had thrown down his weapon and thought that this was an excellent chance to attack. He ordered the girl to attack, after which they both threw their stone axes at the enemies. One of them flew straight at the man who didn't even suspect that he was about to say goodbye to life. A moment later, the axe flew into the villain's head with great speed. One of the captives was now safe. With a long, dying cry, the man fell dead to the ground. This distracted the remaining warriors of the tiger tribe, allowing Yarisoyan to get behind them. Without thinking twice, the girl swung her weapon hard in order to attack and kill the enemy. Having plunged the spear into the enemy's body, the girl screamed that this was heavenly punishment for breaking the agreement. The defeated enemy immediately fell to the ground, and splashes of scarlet blood flew around. The next moment, the savage loudly declared to her enemies that she was the daughter of a great warrior named Yarimanso, and her name was Yarisoyon. Hearing this, the surviving men of the tiger tribe became very frightened. At this time, the main character did not lose his vigilance and had already swung his stone axe to attack his enemies. The next moment, the guy furiously rushed into battle in order to destroy his enemies and end this bloodshed. The protagonist furiously rushed into battle in order to destroy his enemies and end this bloodshed. Choosing the right moment, he pushed off the ground with force and jumped high into the air. The guy was approaching his enemy at such a high speed that he could no longer do anything to avoid the collision. The next moment, splashes of blood flew to the side, and the villain fell to the ground dead. The main character was pleased with himself and said that those who lived by attacks died from attacks. Hearing this, Angel couldn't hold back her laughter. The guy asked why the girl was laughing because since the moment of his birth, he had killed savages for the first time. She assumed that the guy apparently wanted to look cool, but it turned out so-so. Meanwhile, Yarisoyan continued to deal with the enemies. She was angry and her strong blows caused the blood of the defeated enemies to fly around. Mad with rage, the girl continued to cut up the already dead enemy and threatened to do to her opponents the same thing they did to her father. Suddenly, the main character grabbed the girl by the hand and asked her to stop. But Yarisoyan did not agree with this because the people from the tiger tribe also killed her mother, and she had to take revenge. The protagonist understood her feelings but said that they needed to leave here as soon as possible. Yarisoyan did not understand why they needed to leave and what would happen to her village in that case. Taking a torch in his hands, the guy said that the village could no longer be saved and that it would burn down. Then he suggested that the fire could spread throughout the forest, so it was necessary to leave. The guy also said that now it was more important to escape and not let the enemies capture them, so it was necessary to collect the surviving food and weapons, and the faster the better. Yarisoyan, hearing this, did not object and, although reluctantly, agreed with the guy. Sometime later, our heroes were already making their way through a dense dark forest, leaving behind a huge flame. Looking at the fire for the last time, the surviving girls cried and regretted that they were leaving their home and would no longer be able to live there. There were still a few minutes left before the mission was completed. The guy asked the angel what she thought about it. The girl replied that the main character had done well with the first task. Suddenly, she added that problems could have arisen because the guy overdid it. The main character did not understand what the girl was talking about. At this moment, Yarisoyan turned to the thoughtful Caribus. She sincerely thanked the guy and said that they survived thanks to him. The guy felt that there was some strange atmosphere between them, but he also praised the girl for her good work. The next moment, the savage, for no apparent reason, took the main character by the hand, which alarmed the guy. Yarisoyan announced that from now on he was their leader, and all the people of the tribe were in solidarity with this decision. The main character got nervous and did not understand what the girl was talking about. Then the angel said that the guy should have refused this by any means. The guy quickly opened the mission window to see how much time he had left before completing the task. The timer showed 1 minute 52 seconds. Then the main character thought that if he gets up and waits for you, the blood of the silver moon will not be passed on to descendants, and the state will not be founded. The worried boy turned to the girl and said that he was not fit for the role of leader, and that it was Yarisoyan who should lead the tribe. The girl laughed at this and said that no matter how you look at it, it was the guy who saved them all, and therefore it was not clear why she should become the leader. The main character mentally begged the girl to agree because time was running out. Not knowing what to do, the guy asked the angel about it. She replied that she herself did not know and asked the main character to quickly tell Yarisoyan at least something. There were only a few seconds left before the mission was completed. It seemed that the task would fail. I understand that he no longer had any other choice. The guy suddenly knelt down in front of the girl. The next moment he took Yarisoyan by the hand and confessed his love to her, after which he suggested having children so that one of them would become the leader of the tribe. The last second was slipping away on the clock, but it seemed to drag on forever. Yarisoyan looked at the main character and could not say anything. She was very surprised by his proposal. The guy looked at the girl without showing fear and obediently waited for her answer. At this point, the time allotted for completing the mission ended. Immediately, a gusty wind arose which easily bent the trunks of large trees. The next moment, the main character and angel found themselves on the ruins of the kingdom. The mission window congratulated the guy on completing the mission and completing the main and additional tasks. A short silence. Angel rudely asked me if the main character had gone crazy. The guy didn't understand what the question was about. The unexpected girl began to scold the guy for daring to mix his blood with the royal one. But the main character didn't see a problem with this, because it happened 1,500 years ago, and it didn't matter with whom the incest occurred. Angel was curious about how this would affect the future, but in any case, she praised the guy for the excellent execution of the mission. The main character was surprised that the ghost got to work and the kingdom began to recover. The girl explained that everything he managed to change in history would be reflected here. The angel also said that the guy managed to protect the royal blood, which became the first step in the revival of the country. The guy thought that thanks to him, a new path for the development of the kingdom would be created. The reward for successfully completing the mission was a first-level palace, the construction of which had already been completed. The guy didn't really like this award because even his dog's kennel was better. The artistic text that accompanied this construction congratulated the owner and reported that there was nothing in this house yet. However, there was no need to worry because the generosity of the countryside would reward him. He asked Mrs. Angel if she thought it was not quite the right reward, since he had tried so hard to complete this task. The girl replied that a journey of 1,000 miles began with a single step, and no country was built in just one day, and should not be destroyed in the same amount of time. The protagonist asked when the kingdom would be fully restored. Angela replied that the harder he tried, the sooner the country of the Silver Moon would become a prosperous state again. The girl also added that the Mother of God said that her children will blossom on the blood spilled by the main character, and with each successful mission, the kingdom will restore its appearance step by step. One of the awards was also the construction of a first-level monument. The guy was happy about this because he hoped to finally get something worthwhile. He obediently waited for the ghost to do their job, but Angel asked the guy not to expect anything incredible. Seeing the final result, the main character was very surprised and turned to Mrs. Angela. The guy asked if this statue was dedicated to Caribe. The girl confirmed it. The description stated that the monument was dedicated to the terrible devil of the axe, Karibisu, who burned everything in his path, and his axe that cut through the soul was merciless and knew no compassion. The main character was very surprised and indignant because he was called the devil despite the fact that he did good deeds and saved everyone. The angel said that firstly he deceived the enemies in order to save Yarisoyan, but the guy did not understand what was so bad about that. Secondly, the guy burned down the village of the Tiger tribe. The main character justified himself by saying that there was a war there and he couldn't act differently. Thirdly, the guy saw the corpses of his fellow tribesmen, but ran away without blinking an eye. In addition, he burned down not only the village, but also the forest. Angel summed up that during the mission, the main characters burned down a village in which old people and children remained, and also left behind the corpses of their fellow tribesmen. And on top of everything else, the forest also managed to sleep. The guy was shocked by these accusations. The girl also suggested that during the mission he never felt any remorse. The main character agreed with all the accusations, but did not understand how he should have acted differently, because if he had failed the task, he would have died. Mrs. Angel said that it was for these reasons that people called him the devil. The ghosts that were flying around made gloomy sounds and called the main character a devil with an axe. After some time, the main character came out of his palace. Ghosts were still flying around, making ominous sounds. The Lady Angel turned to the guy and asked if he had had a good rest. The main character replied that it was terrible. Dark bags under his eyes indicated that the guy had trouble sleeping. The girl hoped that he would work hard to achieve his goal. The main character began to be indignant because she spoke as if he alone was to blame for everything. The girl confirmed this. The guy fell silent because he didn't even know what to answer to that. The Lady Angel waved her hand, after which magical inscriptions appeared around the guy. They formed a text and created a window of missions to change history. The guy had to go through 4 more tasks. He began to doubt whether the kingdom was worth such trouble. Suddenly, the angel said that in fact the guy and his family contributed to the destruction of the kingdom. The main character became indignant because he did not have a relationship with that savage. The girl said that in a past life, he and his family bribed people in important positions. The guy thought that it was not important and suggested moving on to the next mission. The angel agreed with this and waved her hand again, after which a task was revealed, according to which it was necessary to protect the blood of the Silver Moon and direct the tribe to a safe place. The system window asked the main character if he was sure that he wanted to change history, because in case of failure he would die and the kingdom would be destroyed. The guy reluctantly agreed. Immediately a strong wind arose, and the guy himself was transported into the past. It was raining heavily. The main character entered the body of one of the prisoners who were awaiting their fate. The guy looked around and did not understand what was happening here, and why he and other people were tied up. A man with a thick beard and mustache said in a rough voice that all the captives were sinners. The stranger sat on the throne surrounded by loyal subordinates and looked down on them. The protagonist addressed him as Mrs. Angel in the hope that she would be able to explain everything to him. The man continued to menacingly say that because of their cursed people, God was angry, and that was why it had been raining for the fourth day in a row. The guy didn't understand what kind of damn people the man was talking about. Angel explained that this name was given to the descendants of the Bear Claw tribe. Suddenly, one of the prisoners objected to the man and said that this was complete nonsense. The main character immediately looked to the side to see who was speaking. The girl asked why the man blamed her people for all the troubles, since precipitation did not depend on man in any way. The main character looked closely at this girl and thought that this world definitely looked different. The angel confirmed this and added that changes had also occurred in the guy's body. The man was angry at the girl's statements and could not believe that she allowed herself to speak to him like that. The main character asked Mrs. Angela if they were a weak tribe. Without waiting for the answer to the end, the guy said that he had a solution. Out of nowhere, he raised his leg high as if he was about to kick someone. The next moment, the main character kicked the girl, causing her to lose her footing and fall into the mud. Mrs. Angel was shocked by this unexpected action and therefore asked what the guy was doing. The main character did not answer, but only attacked the rest of the captives, and even his tied hands did not stop him from beating his fellow tribesmen. When the deed was done, the boy fell to his knees in front of the man who had captured them. Bowing respectfully, he loudly addressed the master and asked him to forgive them all. He then promised that he would catch the man who had made a deal with the devil, which was the reason why it had been raining for the fourth day, and if he failed, the man would simply execute them all. The man and his subordinates were very surprised by the words and actions of the main character, and therefore remained silent for some time, not knowing how to react to this. The other captives were also surprised because they did not expect this from their fellow tribesmen. Finally, the man timidly asked how the guy could beat his bride there so mercilessly. The main character was very surprised by this and turned back to look at the girl. She didn't say anything, but it was clear that she was very unhappy and angry at her fiancé for what he did. Mrs. Angel congratulated the guy on the fact that he was now 100% trash, and in addition, called him a greedy person. Sometime later, all the captives returned to their settlement, in the middle of which stood the same statue of the devil Karabisu. Because of the continuous rain, the water level rose higher and higher. The Lady Angel said that it would continue for another 20 days. The guy assumed that this would cause a flood. According to the task, the guy had to take the tribe to a safe place to avoid the flood. Angel confirmed this. The main character did not understand how to convince people that there would be a flood and was afraid that they would not believe him if he said that in a few days the entire area would be flooded. The angel suggested that in order to complete this task, the guy needed to build trusting relationships with his fellow tribesmen. The protagonist looked at the people standing behind him and realized that this would not be easy given recent events. Suddenly, his fiancée approached him and said that she was disappointed in the guy and could not believe that he kicked her. The girl tried to say that she couldn't even imagine that the guy would turn out to be such a bad person. Her fellow tribesmen supported her and were also indignant because of this act. The main character did not understand how in such a situation he needed to build a trusting relationship with these people. Lady Angel sarcastically said that the guy will reap what he sows. For some reason, the guy thought that at that moment the girl was smiling slyly and making fun of him. Angel was also indignant at the guy's actions. He tried to sell himself by having no idea that this girl would be his bride. Then the main character thought that he should start by restoring the trust that already existed, and so he sincerely apologized and said that he did it to protect the girl. It seemed that it worked, and now the girl was indignant because the scoundrels who captured them constantly blamed her people for all the troubles. Everyone around supported the words of Lady Arya. At this time, the main character decided to look up information about this city and religion. The city was called Samora. 85% of its inhabitants believed in Marduk, who was the son of the sun. Another 10% believed in Enril, who was the manager of promises, and only 5% believed in the devil with the axe Karabisu. The main character was surprised that the warrior about whom myths and legends were composed was worshipped by only 5% of the Bearclaw tribe. He thought that things were bad and that it was a real act of suicide. Meanwhile, a confrontation was brewing. The dissatisfied people were angry and proposed cutting the throat of the city's head that very night. Hearing this, the main character loudly addressed the people and asked them to stop talking about it. The guy then asked if his fellow tribesmen were confident that they would be able to defeat absolutely all opponents. The main character asked if his fellow tribesmen were confident that they would be able to defeat absolutely all opponents. Arya asked if the guy suggested doing nothing again. He explained that if they don't get into trouble, they can avoid casualties, But if they rebel, everyone will die. The girl did not agree with this and said that whether it was the incessant rains, the plague, or any diseases, their tribe would always be blamed for everything. She continued saying that their children would always be treated like slaves. After which Arya asked Moso why he got engaged to her. The main character did not answer and only looked at his fellow tribesmen who were standing nearby. People were unhappy and silently waited for the guy to respond. The main character thought that now he sincerely felt anger and at the same time sadness. Without answering, Moso suddenly took a few steps forward. He held a small axe in his hands and was flexing his hand as if he was preparing to do something. Arya did not understand what was on her fiancé's mind and obediently watched him without interfering in what was happening. The next moment, Moso swung his weapon sharply and threw it. The axe flew at great speed towards the statue of the devil Karabisu. All the people were very surprised by this. They didn't understand anything and asked the main character why he did it. The guy explained that from now on, he would throw an axe at the statue, and if it hit and got stuck in it, the heavens would punish him. He continued to say that if the monument is not damaged, it will mean that Karabisu is favorably disposed towards him. People were surprised and did not dare to express dissatisfaction or interfere with the guy. Moso understood that everyone was looking at him with bewilderment now. However, he had the skill of wielding a third-level axe, which he received as a reward along with the statue. The next moment, the main character threw several axes at once with all his might. All of them hit the target accurately, but did not leave a single scratch on the monument. Mosuo tribesmen were very surprised by this result and could not believe that the monument remained intact. One of the men timidly said that he had heard of something similar in legends. The main characters mentally laughed at these savages and thought that people who believed in implausible things could be easily surprised by simple tricks. Miss Angel reminded the guy that he was Karabisu, so his ridicule was inappropriate, and he himself, like no one else, described the expression better, spitting upward while lying on your back. The main character heard this and didn't answer, but simply resigned himself to how mean Angel was. After this, he spoke loudly to his fellow tribesmen and asked if there were any among them who believed that they were more worthy of Karabis's favor than he was. None of those present dared to express dissatisfaction or doubt Mosuo's exclusivity. Then the boy asked the people for permission to become their ruler for 3 days and promised that he could lead their tribe to a glorious future. The people immediately fell to their knees and bowed respectfully to the protagonist, recognizing his right to power. Angel was surprised that the guy had previously had a negative attitude towards superstitions, but now he was trying to use them to his advantage. He explained that barbarians at all times were easily influenced by religion. Looking around, the main character was surprised at the terrible conditions in which these people lived and became indignant that the leader's power led to this. He suggested that it would be better to leave this place and build a new village. Arya did not agree with this, because they had lived here since ancient times. After that, the girl asked if the guy had a plan. She also hoped that he was not going to make one of their people a criminal and send them to be torn apart by the leader. The guy said that he couldn't do that. After thinking for a bit, Arya reminded him that he was the man who hit his fiancée. The main character asked not to be angry with him because he had already asked for forgiveness. The girl asked, so what was he going to do next? Let's take a short pause. The guy replied that he was going to become the false culprit of what was happening. The girl didn't understand what this meant, but Moso didn't explain and asked her to just watch while he sorted everything out. Night fell. Most of the houses in the city were shrouded in darkness as their owners had no way to light a fire. Among them, one building stood out. Small torches were burning near it, and there were guards. The man holding the spear in his hands became alarmed when he noticed that someone from the darkness was approaching the house. He ordered the stranger, whose face was hidden by a hood, to stop. After that, the guard asked who the stranger was. The main character said that his name was Moso, and he was from the cursed tribe. He came here because he had a conversation with the leader. The guards looked at each other and remembered that this was the guy who hit his fiancée during the day. The main character was unhappy that rumors about him were spreading so quickly. In order to quickly achieve what he wanted, Moso approached one of the guards to talk to him. He whispered in his ear that the damned tribe was planning a rebellion. Hearing this, the man became frightened. Moso asked to remain calm, because if someone from his tribe celebrates that he was here, then trouble will happen. The guard agreed with this and took the guy to the leader so that he could quickly report everything to him. The main character was sure that after the truth came out, all these guys would want to rip out his tongue, but now these scoundrels would test his skill of hanging noodles on people's ears. The chief was surprised that the head of Samora had come to see him. The guy said that he had come to meet the man and talk. The main characters called the man a great son of the sun, who gave his love and care to his village. After that, he thought that flattery would seem sweeter if you look at a person from the bottom up. The chief was surprised and asked what was wrong with the guy. He replied that the man had always generously gifted his tribe, and therefore he could not help but admire the master. The main character also added that they were all alive only thanks to the wise ruler. The chief agreed with this, and Moso couldn't help but smile and think about what a fool the man was. The main character continued to say that he managed to find out who was to blame for the fact that the rain had not stopped for the 4th day, and it was terrible. After this, the guy turned to Angel and said that he would now tell her about what flattery can lead to, but the girl was not interested, and she asked him not to get distracted. Moso continued to tell the chief that he had something to tell him, but he was afraid to say it, and did not know if he should say it. The man was already starting to get nervous because he couldn't get the information he needed. Unable to bear it, the leader shouted that the guy didn't have to worry and could tell him everything because he wouldn't hurt him. The main character once again bowed respectfully and thanked the great leader, but said that even though he had hit his bride today, he was very worried about her. The man understood where everything was heading and promised that Arya would also be safe, after which he asked if the guy wanted anything else. The main character smiled slyly and thought that of course he wanted to bargain some more, but of course he didn't say it out loud. Having received no answer, the leader ordered the boy to immediately tell everything he knew. The main character smiled slyly and thought that the leader had fallen for his trick. The angel did not understand that this was all from the beginning. The guy explained that if he said that he had some secret information that he was ready to share, then the leader's head would completely stop working and he would not suspect the guy of anything. The main character bowed again and thanked the man for taking care of him, his wife, and future children. The leader asked the guy not to waste time and to say what he knew, and if he continued to evade the answer, he would immediately lose his head. The main character turned to the angel and said that flattery was a terrible thing because it makes people misunderstand you. The girl agreed with this. Finally, the boy loudly told the man that in 3 days there would be an uprising. The leader clearly did not expect this, but he took this information calmly. He decided not to rush to conclusions and let the main character finish his story. Mozo continued to say that the tribe had decided that it was better to die fighting for freedom than to continue living as slaves. The man was indignant and called them dirty people who knew no loyalty. The loyal subordinates were already ready to go to the village to destroy all the rebels, but the leader stopped them because he did not want his people to suffer. The main character was surprised by this and admitted that the man had an extraordinary mind. After this, he turned to the chief and said that he had an idea, which was to drive out the cursed tribe. Then the man asked what would happen if the people disobeyed and decided to attack anyway, because he was not sure that these evil savages would leave the village just like that. The boy suggested that the chief tell the people that he is driving them out, and then, if they do not leave the village, he will attack, taking them by surprise. The man was surprised by this plan, but he could not decide whether to agree or refuse it. The Lady Angel was worried because she was afraid that this would not help to complete the task. The man thought about the guy's words for a while. He wanted to ask something, but Mozo interrupted him. The guy said that the exiled tribe would not survive on their own for long, but if they decided not to leave the village, the leader could suddenly attack them anyway. The man thought again, but the main character already knew that his plan had succeeded and the leader would do as he told him. Mozo continued to say that in any case, the leader would remain the winner. The guy's real goal was to escape from the place where a flood would soon occur. The man said that he had no reason to refuse, and therefore he gave the guy a chance, but threatened that if he betrayed him, the leader would execute him and Arya. The guy replied that he understood everything and was not crazy enough to fight against the great army of the leader. At the same time, he thought how stupid these barbarians were, because he had lived as a treacherous and greedy man for 20 years. The next day, news reached Arya that their tribe was being driven out. The girl did not understand why this suddenly happened, because they never went against the will of the leader. The man stated outright that the people from the cursed tribe were like parasites that needed to be gotten rid of before they caused irreparable harm. The girl thought that it was unfair because it was he who used people as slaves and now called them parasites. The chief was indignant that this ungrateful woman dared to raise her voice at him and suggested that he solve everything by force if that was what she wanted. Two tribes turned against each other. Some demanded that the cursed tribe leave, while others said that this was the land of their ancestors. The chieftain's confidants began throwing stones and demanding that the cursed tribe leave their land. People began to cover their heads in every possible way so that flying stones would not harm them. Arya was angry and unhappy with this state of affairs, but she couldn't do anything. The main character immediately noticed the predatory gaze of the girl, who wanted to take revenge on her enemies. This look reminded him of Yarasoyan, who also fought to the end and did not spare her enemies. The guy immediately thought that there was no doubt that Arya was a descendant of Yarasoyan. Suddenly, Lady Angel asked the boy to focus on protecting the blood of the Silver Moon, because now he had to prevent the slaughter from developing. The main character asked the girl to step back and reminded her that she had handed over the reins of power to him for exactly 3 days. He went on to say that they could not win if they fought the chieftain's men, and it was better to live a hard life than to die. Therefore, the main character suggested retreating in order to find a new home, and if they lose the second home, they will find a third, so there was nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, the situation between people was heating up. Someone had already taken up arms in order to prove their case not by words but by deeds. One of his fellow tribesmen said that if he dies, he will definitely not be alone. Fortunately, Arya stopped him in time. The man tried to justify himself, but the girl said that if they started fighting, their tribe would be destroyed, so they shouldn't have done that. After this, Arya turned to the leader and asked him to show leniency, because if they left the village now without anything, they would simply die. But the man was adamant and said that it was already too late. Besides, the girl was not able to tame her dogs. The man then again called the people damned parasites and demanded that they immediately get lost. The damned tribe had no choice but to submit and leave under the rude shouts of the crowd. Moso thought that although these people were barbarians, he felt sorry for them. He also could not believe that the first village was burned and the second would disappear because of the flood. The angel asked the guy to tell it like it is, namely that the first village burned down because of the fire he started, and the second was lost because someone liked dirty smiles. Suddenly Arya turned to the guy and said that she did as he told her, but now they didn't even have food and she didn't know what to do next. The main character replied that first they all needed to go to the mountains and live there for some time. When the girl asked why this was necessary, the guy briefly answered that it was the will of Karibisu. It seemed that Arya was skeptical about this answer, but did not dare to object to God's chosen one. Finally, she asked who would be to blame if something went wrong. The guy answered that the responsibility would be placed on Karibisu. The girl continued to say that for several days Moso had not been himself, and if something happened, then all the responsibility would lie with him. After thinking for a bit, the guy said in a mysterious voice that it was all God's plan. For a long time, people walked in the pouring rain trying to find at least some kind of shelter. Finally, they managed to find a cave in which they could all settle, but this was only the beginning of their test. Thus ended the second day of the main character's stay in this world. Almost the entire next day, the guy watched the weather, anticipating a worsening of the situation. When there was 1 hour and 5 minutes left before the end of the mission, the rain began to intensify. This was noticed by the main character and Mrs. Angel. With each passing second, the rain became heavier and was accompanied by powerful gusts of wind. The main character could not believe that there were such heavy rains. The Lady Angel explained that the reason for this was a typhoon that raged on the coast. The guy said that in his past life he once experienced a typhoon, but it wasn't that bad. Angel added that this typhoon was already the third today, but the worst was yet to come. Mrs. Angel informed the main character that there were still 9 typhoons ahead. The guy was surprised by this and could not believe that such bad weather was even possible. The girl replied that the reason for this was that they had no luck at all. Suddenly the boy heard his fellow tribesmen loudly addressing the deities. People knelt down and asked God not to be angry with them for making a mistake. The Lady Angel said that the guy had done a good job with the mission and suggested that he return and rest before starting a new task. The main character refused because he had some other business. The girl did not understand what he was talking about because the mission was almost completed. Moso smiled slyly and said that he didn't like the way the task ended. The main character asked people to stop this. Arya, who along with everyone else asked the gods for forgiveness, was very surprised by this. She thought the guy was crazy and asked him to immediately fall to his knees, not believing that he did not fear God. The main character objected to this and said loudly for everyone to hear that God was not angry with them. Lightning flashed behind the guy as he said that following the will of Caribes, he brought people to this place. He continued to say that God never left them to their fate. The tribesmen listened to their leader in fascination. Arya stood her ground and loudly asked why God allowed them to suffer. Looking mysteriously into the distance, the main character replied that all this was a divine test. After this, he said that their God was strict but fair, and those people who blamed him for difficulties defiled and insulted him, and therefore did not deserve forgiveness. Mrs. Angel did not understand what the guy was doing and therefore asked him to wait and explain. The main characters, smiling slyly, replied that right now he was composing another myth and asked the girl to simply watch as he changed history. The angel got scared and said that if the guy interfered with religion, then trouble would happen, and because of his carelessness, changes could occur that they would not be able to cope with. The guy replied that he knew the world better than the angel, and now he intended to instill in people the religion of the goddess of the moon. The angel said that it was superstition, to which the protagonist replied that Karabisu was the same superstition, and he was just trying to gain benefit. Moso continued to tell the people that they had successfully passed God's test, and that they would be able to see the proof of this right now. After which he called the people children of God and pointed them to the village they had recently left. The water completely flooded it, and people could not resist the rapid flow. The main character said that this is what the end looked like for those who expelled them. The water was getting closer and closer to the chieftain's estate. Very soon the man was floundering in the water asking for help, but it never came. Unable to cope with the elements, the leader drowned and his body was carried away by a rapid stream of water. People saw all this and were shocked because they could also die from the streams. The main character ordered everyone to bow to God and said that 700 years of humiliation and slavery were finally over because they were able to pass God's test. Moso looked at Arya and realized that the myth was already ready. There was 1 minute and 12 seconds left until the mission was completed. The guy decided to make the most of this time and said that he heard the word of God, which said that they were the only tribe that was allowed to conquer others and rule over them. Angel couldn't believe that the guy was saying this and thought that if he continued to talk such nonsense, it could lead to sad consequences in the future. The main character continued to say that from now on their only god and patron was the goddess of the moon and offered to take over this world in order to rule over people. After this, he took Arius by the hand and called him to him. He announced to the people that, according to the will of the goddess of the moon, this girl was an angel sent from heaven. Finally, Moso said that the moon goddess promised that if they all united under the leadership of Arya, then they and their descendants would become the rulers of this world. All the tribesmen received these words with great joy, and the main character thought that he would not make a mistake a second time. The next moment, the time that was allotted for completing the task ended. Everything around began to shake as if from an earthquake. The mission window congratulated the protagonist on successfully changing history and informed him that the main and additional tasks had been completed. The guy was pleased with himself and was glad that, even despite the criticism directed at him, he had completed the mission superbly. The main character did not understand why the angel did not praise him and assumed that she was offended by him, but he was most interested in the reward. It turned out that the issuance of the reward was suspended. The guy immediately asked the angel what was going on, but she herself did not understand. After that, the girl waved her hand and opened the mission window, which indicated that the task had been suspended. The main character looked at the description of the task and did not understand what was the reason for the suspension of the mission. Angel suggested that choosing the guy as a savior was wrong, or that there had been such a strong change in history that the system had returned an error. The main character began to be indignant, because not only did the girl constantly criticize his actions, but she also decided to put all the blame on him. Suddenly, a ghost flew up to the guy and began to attract attention to himself. He acted as if he wanted to say something. The main character immediately reported this to the Lady Angel and then asked the spirit if they were familiar. The girl explained that the spirits that lived here were somehow once connected with the destruction of the kingdom, so this ghost could be a relative of the guy or a member of the royal family. Suddenly, the spirit uttered some drawn-out sounds that sounded like the name Moso. Hearing this, the guy immediately told the lady that a few days ago at night, someone had pronounced the name Karabisu in the same way. The angel couldn't believe that the guy heard the spirits talking and asked if he was sure about it. The main character confirmed this and said that he had no reason to lie about such a thing. He went on to say that that night he clearly heard someone say the name Karabisu, but decided that he had simply imagined it. The angel felt that she had to check something, and to do this she needed to borrow the power of a god. The girl turned to the Mother of God and said that she had always been next to her and wanted her to be here, after which she asked to grant her the power that would allow her to see the truth. Immediately, mysterious snake-like shadows crawled from the angel and rushed towards the ghost. They grabbed the spirit and enveloped him from all sides, as if spinning him into a whirlwind. Seeing this, the main character asked if the divine power was not illuminated by holy light, and not by a dark, snake-like shadow. The girl replied that it was divine mercy and that it was necessary to show reading. Suddenly, a bright light began to break through from inside the vortex, destroying the ominous shadows. The next moment, Arya appeared in front of our heroes. The main character was very surprised by this. The girl turned to Mr. Moso, called him a great prophet, and happily reported that his mission was completed. The guy asked Arya what she was doing there, after which he turned to Mrs. Angela for clarification. The main character was also puzzled by why the girl addressed him so formally. But Mrs. Angel could not answer anything because she was very worried about something. Finally, she said that all this happened because of the deception of the guy who changed history. And now, as the fate of the kingdom changed, the forgotten great people also began to be remembered. The guy looked around and realized that if all these ghosts were his relatives or people involved in the destruction of the kingdom, then it was possible to see their true appearance. At that moment, one of the ghosts seemed to turn to the main character. The guy thought that the spirit was also one of the ancestors of the kingdom. But a moment later, the ghost quickly flew away. The guy was annoyed because he thought that this spirit would help him. Then the main character turned to Mrs. Angel and asked if he could see the true appearance of all the ghosts. The girl replied that there was only one way to do this, namely to save the kingdom from complete destruction. Arya watched all this indifferently and thought about something of her own. Finally, she turned to Mr. Moso and thanked him for everything. After which, she asked if the guy knew what had happened to them. The girl said that soon their fellow tribesmen committed treason and rebelled against their authorities. She remembered how, in the heat of battle, Moso asked her to run away while he held off the enemy. But the girl did not listen because she could not leave him alone. Arya continued her story and said that their attack on the rebels was successful, but they were unable to avoid a fight. The girl remembered the horror she experienced that day. One of the rebels struck the Moso with a spear, inflicting mortal wounds on the boy. On this day, their prophet died before Arya's eyes. When it was all over, the girl could not rejoice in her victory because the most valuable thing had been taken from her. She grieved and asked God why he was putting them through trials again. The girl said that he had not cared about them from the very beginning, and that was why they were a cursed tribe. Arya continued to say that then her fiancé, fellow tribesmen, and even the purest faith were on the verge of extinction, but the main character saved them. The guy replied that he was simply doing what Mrs. Angel told him to do. The girl herself denied it. Arya said that it didn't matter what the guy's intentions were, because no one except Mr. Moso had ever helped them, so she was grateful to the main character. After this, the girl said that she had another request for the guy, which she really asked him to fulfill. Suddenly, a mission window appeared in front of him, which said that Arya asked to complete an additional task. The main character was very surprised. According to the assignment, the guy had to supplement the myth he had already created with more detailed aspects. The guy asked the angel if he could refuse, to which he received an affirmative answer. For a while, the main character wondered whether he should have carried out this mission, since it was not mandatory. Finally, he answered that he agreed. Arya was happy to hear this answer, and Angel was slightly puzzled. She said that she was sure that the guy would refuse. The guy replied that Angel knew absolutely nothing about the world, and added that it was necessary to strike while the iron was hot. After the main character accepted the task, he and the angel were immediately transported to the past. The guy looked around. The rain continued to fall, but it seemed that it had already weakened. Suddenly, Arya approached him and said that something bad had happened because people were unhappy again, and the girl didn't know what to do about it. The main character asked the angel how much time had passed since he left and how long the rain would last. It turned out that exactly 20 days had passed, and the rain would stop in 5 days. The time limit for completing this task was 6 hours. The guy thought that if he managed his time correctly, he would succeed. Arya asked again what she should do with the dissatisfied people. The protagonist replied that he was just thinking about how to solve this problem. Suddenly, the guy wondered why the girl was so different from her ghost. The angel explained that people's personalities change greatly depending on what they've been through. The main character was surprised that the angel knew a lot about people. The girl replied that the reason for this was that once upon a time, she herself was a pure and holy virgin. Meanwhile, Arya asked if the guy had already figured out how to solve the problem. He replied that there were 2 reasons why people were worried. The first reason was this incessant rain, and the second was that there was now disorder within the tribe. The boy thought that the most important aspect of conducting politics in the kingdom was the creation of a code of laws, although he did not always obey them. Then the guy noted that he never managed to marry Arya while he was alive. Angel clarified that it was not him, but the person whose body the main character now possessed. She also added that marrying a man like the guy was a real disaster. Arya said that they followed the laws that were established in Samora, but the main character replied that this city no longer existed and therefore they had to create a new state. The girl would like to have a country just for her damn tribe, but she thought it was unrealistic. The guy asked Arya not to worry and leave everything to him because he already had a plan. For some time, the main character wandered alone in the rain as if he was looking for something. He looked around and asked where it was. Angel asked what the guy was doing now. The main character replied that he was looking for something with which he could create laws. The next moment, he found what he needed. The guy held a stone in his hands and said that he would succeed. The girl did not raise what this ordinary stone was needed for. The main character laughed at the fact that the angel did not understand anything and said that this stone would become the most precious thing of the tribe. For several hours, the boy used an axe to carve a code of laws on a block of stone. When everything was finished, the main character said that he would present it to people as a gift from God for the fact that they suffered. Angel thought that it was a fraud. The guy said that this is exactly how everything in the world was arranged. The angel was unhappy and demanded that the guy not dare to do this because it was blasphemy. But the main character refused and stood his ground. This caused the girl to faint and ask God to punish this man. The guy tried to prove his case by saying that he only had 6 hours to complete the task. He had to complete this mission, but he was unable to do it using conventional methods due to the short amount of time. The guy thought that it would be better to first create a set of laws and then operate them to please himself. The angel replied that this method should not lead to God being blamed for all troubles. The main character replied that to achieve their goal, they had to use anything, be it religion or something else. Suddenly, the guy raised his hands up and loudly addressed God, asking him to punish him if he believed that he had acted wrongly. After this, the main character turned to the lady angel and said with a smile that nothing had happened, and therefore the truth was on his side. The girl didn't know what to answer and was only angry at the guy's ignorance. The next moment, a bright lightning flashed in the sky and thunder struck, which made the main character very scared. He immediately began to apologize and justify himself by saying that he in no way wanted to offend God. He simply had no other choice. The angel decided to play a joke on the guy and said that his apology embarrassed her a little. Meanwhile, Arya was surrounded by people and asked to prove that she was the ruler who was recognized as a god. The tribesmen asked her to stop this reign. The main character watched this from the side and was indignant that these people had recently almost died because of the flood, but did not appreciate it at all. They continued to say that all the troubles were because Karabisu was disappointed in them. People also doubted whether they should follow the moon goddess. Moso intervened in this conversation and demanded that his fellow tribesmen stop this ignorant talk. The main character said loudly that it was the leader's duty to appease God's wrath. One of his fellow tribesmen tried to explain to him that this was not the case, but the guy interrupted him before he could finish his monologue. The boy said that he understood the reason for the discontent, however. Trying to question the true intentions of the Holy Virgin was a crime. Moso went on to say that it was also a crime to suspect that a chief was incapable of performing his duties. The guy who not long ago doubted the truth of the faith in the goddess of the moon was now afraid to say too much and only silently looked down. Looking at him with a stern look, the main character threatened that if God did hear Arya's prayers and the rain stopped, he would have to pay for his words. The guy looked at the timer to find out how much time he had left. It turned out that there were still 2 hours and 1 minute left until the end of the mission. The lady angel said that she had never met anyone angrier than the main character. He asked the girl to simply praise him for having a good head and not to say such things. The guy who doubted the moon goddess asked how he would have to take responsibility for his words if he turned out to be wrong. The main character thought that he would like to chop off this guy's entire arm, but it would look cruel. The next moment, he declared that he would simply cut off the blasphemer's arm at the elbow. The tribesmen who heard this were delighted and supported Mr. Moso's idea because it was warlike. Arya asked the guy not to hurry because she did not have the ability to stop this rain. Moso took the girl by the shoulder and kindly asked her to just trust him. After that, he asked the girl to climb to the top of the mountain and find there a stone tablet that was left by the goddess of the moon herself, and then bring it here. Arya was very surprised when she received this task and looked at the guy with wide eyes, fascinated. The protagonist asked why the girl had not yet decided to climb to the top of the hill and offer prayers to their deity. Arya asked if they didn't need a sacrifice for the ritual. The guy loudly declared that the moon goddess was cruel, but at the same time generous, so people could not worry about anything. After this, the girl went to get the tablet, and the guy remembered the saying that during a food shortage, it was never worth sacrificing valuable livestock. Meanwhile, the rain continued to fall and showed no signs of stopping. People sat indifferently on the rocks, hiding from the rain. They had absolutely no hope for a better life. The main character passed by his fellow tribesmen and heard their conversations. They talked about how, from the very beginning, all this seemed strange because one god could not control the whole world. People were also afraid that if it rained forever, the end of the world would come. The main character thought that if the prophecy does not come true, he will be branded a failed prophet. Meanwhile, there was 1 hour and 5 minutes left before the mission was completed. The guy turned to Mrs. Angel and asked if there was a possibility that her words could be wrong. The girl replied that this was out of the question, because then his mistake would become hers, and although she didn't like the way the guy completed missions, they had a common destiny. Meanwhile, the people continued to be indignant because the rain did not stop and thought that God had forgotten about them because he was disappointed in the leader. The blasphemer said that he was right and asked Mr. Moso not to be upset. The main character immediately ordered the guy to shut up, after which she thought that he was a pompous idiot. Suddenly people noticed that the rain began to subside little by little and therefore looked at the sky in surprise. The clouds began to move apart, clearing the way for the bright rays of the sun. The rain that had been falling for almost 30 days finally ended. Suddenly some guy loudly asked all his fellow tribesmen to look away. People saw Arya slowly descending from the top of the cliff towards them, carrying something in her hands. The girl held the very stone on which the laws by which her fellow tribesmen would now live would be carved. The people immediately fell to their knees and bowed to Arya, calling her God's messenger. They believed that a miracle had occurred and recognized Lady Arya as their true leader. The protagonist thought that this was his chance, and so he loudly announced that the moon goddess had heard the prayers of their leader. The guy continued to say that as long as Arya and her descendants rule over people, they will be loved by the goddess and will finally be able to rule the world. The people immediately turned to Arya and called her their great ruler. The main character also turned to the girl and asked what she was holding in her hands. It was clear that at first she did not want to participate in the deception, but she still understood that it was necessary for the survival of their tribe. The girl replied that she had found the tablet on top of the hill, after which Moso asked what she had engraved on it. Arya replied that it was nothing, because she had climbed to the top of the hill empty-handed. People looked at their ruler in fascination. Then the girl suggested that this tablet was a gift from the goddess. The main character immediately said that the girl received any goddess and a heavenly gift from her. People immediately crowded around Arya to carefully examine the tablet. Arya began to read the text that was engraved on this stone. It was a set of laws that consisted of 10 points. The tribesmen listened attentively to the girl, because now they would have to live the rest of their lives according to these laws granted by the goddess of the moon. The main characters smiled and were pleased with themselves because their plan had completely succeeded. The guy loudly announced that the moon goddess personally created the laws that they must now obey, and from now on their damn tribe will become great. Then he knelt before Arya and kissed her hand, showing respect to the ruler. This day became the birthday of the people. Lady Angel admitted that it was great, but she couldn't admit that this way of completing the mission was the best. The guy said that if the result was successful, then the method was the best. Suddenly, the main character saw among the people the same guy who doubted the goddess of the moon. He seemed to be trying not to catch anyone's eye. Moso quickly caught up with the guy and stopped him, asking where he was going to go. The guy immediately fell to his knees in front of the main character and admitted that he had sinned, for which he asked for forgiveness. Moso was surprised and thought that this bastard knew how to bow his head, after which he asked the guy's name. He replied that his name was Hosui. Suddenly, the main character said that he forgave him. The guy was very happy about this and sincerely thanked the main character. Moso continued to say that he forgave the guy, and therefore would only cut off his hand, after which he swung his axe. Looking angrily at Hosui, the main character advised him to clamp something in his teeth. The next moment, a terrible scream, which belonged to the guy, echoed throughout the area. That same evening, the fun began. People rejoiced at the end of the rain and the beginning of their new life. The main character looked at all this and thought that it would take a lot of time to develop these people, but his mission was completed. Suddenly, Arya turned to him and asked why it was necessary to stage a whole performance, since the guy had forgiven Hosui. The main character denied it. Then the girl asked him to show her his axe, because if he really had cut off the guy's hand, there should have been blood left on the axe. The guy silently handed his axe to the girl, but it was clear that it was absolutely clean. The girl then suggested that it was the main character who made the stone tablet. Moso thought that Arya was very insightful, but replied that he didn't understand what she was talking about. The girl explained that after making a bet with Hosui, she noticed that the main character had recently been wielding an axe, and shortly after that, she found a tablet on the top of the hill. This seemed strange to her. The guy wondered if all the members of the royal family were so smart. Arya asked again if Mozo had made the tablets. The guy honestly admitted everything, but said that despite the fact that it was a fake, it helped solve the problem. Hearing this, the girl asked the guy to promise her that everything he had done and would do in the future was only for the sake of their tribe. The main character looked into Arya's eyes and thought that these were the eyes of a leader who ruled an entire tribe, as well as a girl who loved one single man. Then the guy smiled good-naturedly and gave the girl his promise. Arya said that this was enough, after which she took the axe in her hand and prepared to do something. The next moment, she swung the axe with all her might and threw it far forward so that no one else could find it. The axe disappeared into the thick bushes, and the main character thought that in this way, the girl got rid of the evidence. Mozo again. The guy asked her what happened. The girl smiled good-naturedly and prepared to say something, but at that very moment, the time allotted for completing the task ended. The last thing the main character heard were words of gratitude, after which a bright light blinded the guy. Having come to his senses, the guy saw Arya in front of him, with a tear running down her cheek. The girl regretted and said that everything could have happened differently, if only she could calm people down, and if she had not been so weak-willed. The protagonist immediately remembered Arya's smiling face, who was happy to be next to Mr. Mozo. Now in front of him stood a completely different Arya, who thanked the dear prophet for everything he had done for her. The additional mission had been successfully completed. For successfully completing the mission, the main character received as a reward a first-level village and a second-level temple, which were already built on the site of the destroyed kingdom. Thanks to the village, the boy received the first-level management skill and the first-level farming skill. Looking around, the main character thought that it looked more like a refugee camp than a village, but as for the skills, the guy was sure that he would need them someday. The Temple of the Moon Goddess had the effect of providing a speech about religious laws that might be needed during the following missions. On the huge stones were carved the laws that the guy gave to the people. The main character thought that if he had known about this in advance, he would have been more careful. Now in this kingdom was Arya, who needed to be placed somewhere. The guy asked Mrs. Angela how to do this. The girl answered that it was necessary to simply voice it. The main character said that he appointed Arya as the head of the temple, for this building received an additional effect of prophecy. The guy suggested that with the help of this effect, he would be able to create a prophecy and be like a real prophet. But the angel said that it was impossible. She explained that it was simply a skill that prevented lie detection. The main character smiled slyly and thought that this was an excellent skill and decided to test it immediately. With a serious look, he turned to Arya and said that this world would be destroyed in 100 years. The girl was scared and could not believe that the catastrophe would happen so soon. She asked whether it would happen because of God's wrath or whether people would destroy themselves. The main character immediately received a message that the girl completely believed him. He was happy and thought that this was much better than the skill of wielding an axe. Sometime later, the guy came out of his home. The lady angel asked him if he had slept well. The answer was negative. Despite this, the girl said that a mission awaited him, according to which it was necessary to choose a founder who would create a kingdom. 7 days were given to complete this task, but the angel also added that there were some differences in this mission. Before this, she was the only one who could give the guy advice while completing tasks. But now it was possible to get advice from Arya as well. The protagonist assumed that Arya was now in the role of a servant. Angel confirmed this and said that this was why it was necessary to choose tenants wisely. After that, she added that the guy would doom himself to disaster if he brought another fool like he was. The angel continued to say that there was a difference between the messenger of God that she was and an ordinary believer, so vocal support was not available to Arya. The main character did not understand what this meant and how support would be provided then. The next moment, a small text window appeared in front of the guy, in which it was written that Arya, being the first saint, supported him. The lady angel waved her hand and announced that she was already ready to begin the next mission. The main character agreed with this and was already looking forward to an interesting adventure. Immediately, a strong wind arose and carried our heroes away. The angel said that now they were going to exchange the lands of the plains and mountains for the lands of the gods. The main characters saw an endless desert in front of them. Suddenly, he smelled iron. Several dozen soldiers mounted their horses and galloped briskly to battle. The soldiers asked their master to give them an order, and they would immediately cut the throats of the enemies and give them to the altar of the goddess. The main character was very surprised and could not believe that he had just been called master. The man on the black horse agreed with his subordinates and said that the goddess was thirsty and therefore they had to satisfy her with a sacrifice. The protagonist asked Mrs. Angela if this man was a descendant of Arya because he had the eyes of the silver moon. The girl replied that he was a pontiff. Suddenly, the man turned to the protagonist and asked him to bless them before the battle. Angel explained that Moss's descendants became religious leaders from generation to generation. A man with long blonde hair and a thick beard decided to satisfy his master's desire. The protagonist looked at the warriors and was surprised that they were no longer a helpless, exiled moon tribe. Then he loudly addressed the warriors and said that when the whole world was erased by the wrath of God, they survived and received a noble mission. He continued to loudly say that the great then did not end, because now they were a wave that would take over the world in the name of the goddess of the moon. All the soldiers took these words with pride and wished to shed the blood of their enemies for the sake of the goddess. The Lady Angel reported that the guy's speech was successful and the warriors completely trusted him. Hearing this, the main character commanded everyone to attack the enemy. The opponents, seeing their enemies, were very frightened because they had already heard about their ferocity. They were called the Devil's Tribe because they rushed into battle with extraordinary fury for the sake of glorifying their goddess. They fought fearlessly and shed the blood of their enemies without sparing their own lives. Watching this from the outside, the main character thought that all this was not bad and it was worth the effort he put in. Lady Angel said that the main character's speech was excellent and did not even believe that he had no experience in military operations before. Therefore, the girl assumed that it was due to the special traits of the person into whom the guy possessed, as it was with Karabisu's fighting skills. Arya also praised the main character, which made him think that it would have been better to replace Mrs. Angela with her. The pontiff thought that no matter how you look at it, the man who stood next to him was the king of this era. The angel said that it didn't matter because he would soon die anyway. The guy didn't even have time to comprehend what he had heard when suddenly something flashed right in front of him at great speed. An enemy arrow hit the king in the neck, causing him to instantly fall from his horse. Everything happened so unexpectedly that the man didn't even have time to realize that his life was about to end. All the king's subordinates immediately fell into a stupor because they did not know how they could help their ruler. The main character himself did not understand why this happened right now, so he just watched everything from the side. He was scared and asked Mrs. Angel why the blood of the Silver Moon's eyes died at the very beginning of his mission. The guy was afraid that this was the end of the mission. The girl asked him to calm down and look out the mission window. It said that the guy needed to choose a founder who would create a kingdom and not protect the king. Immediately, a frightened boy and girl who called him father ran up to the wounded ruler. The angel said that only these two were important for the mission. The protagonist immediately realized that they were the prince and princess. The boy and girl were scared and asked their father to open his eyes and come to his senses. They still hoped that the worst could be avoided. With the last of his strength, the king looked around as if he was looking for someone. Finally, he asked where the high priest was. The protagonist was surprised that the man was still alive, but he took his hand and prepared to listen to the last instructions. The king said that his two children still lacked the experience to rule their tribe, after which the man began to cough up blood. The main character asked the king not to overexert himself and promised that the moon goddess would take care of him. The king called the pontiff his friend and said that he would determine the fate of the moon tribe. Now the main character understood what kind of mission this was. The boy accepted the king's order and swore on his honor and friendship that he would fulfill it. The next moment, the man's hand fell to the ground as the last of his strength left him. All the subjects began to grieve and ask why their master had left for another world so early. This great loss could not help but affect the course of the battle. The protagonist noticed that the losses among the soldiers were enormous. The prince and princess grieved loudly as they bent over the lifeless body of their father. The guy asked Mrs. Angela if she wanted him to choose which of the two of them would inherit the throne. The girl confirmed this and said that one of them would create a kingdom, and now the greedy man, who was the main character, had to decide who would become king. After some time, the entire military camp people asked the pontiff to believe in their courage and loyalty and to take care of their families in the future. The main character thought that after the king died, he was now the most powerful person here and everyone wanted to earn his recognition. He immediately told the people that the late lord had entrusted him only with the right to choose the next monarch, but the subjects said that he was their only hope. The pontiff believed that since people said so, He could not refuse their gifts. All those who wanted to immediately began to present the main character with various offerings. He was sincerely happy about this. The Lady Angel silently watched all this. She was unhappy that the guy was using his position for this. He turned to the girl and said that she shouldn't have stood there and watched him take bribes. The angel was indignant because the guy didn't even know yet how to evaluate the qualities of the prince and princess in order to choose the next monarch. The guy thought that she didn't know at all how the world worked. The main character explained that people were now worried, and in such times bribery was like a balm for the soul. Angel did not understand how this was connected. The guy said that in times like these, a bribe at least gave people relief, because it was a kind of contact. He went on to say that his role now was to take bribes and calm people down. Lady Angel agreed that there was sense in the guy's words, but asked him to be honest with her. The girl assumed that the main character simply enjoyed taking bribes. The guy was very surprised that his plans were revealed so quickly. The subjects bowed respectfully and continued to say that the pontiff was now the only one they could rely on. The main character said that in fact he felt terrible because of the bribes and promised that he became himself again. Angel called him trash. The guy went on to say that people had to do not only what they were good at, but also what they liked. He suggested that greed was his calling. Miss Angel thought that she should have replaced the word trash with something more rude to more accurately describe the main character. After some time, the guy sat in his tent and looked at the items he had received as a bribe. Suddenly, he heard that someone had come to him, and so he turned sharply towards the entrance to look at the uninvited guest. At the entrance stood a man with a girl. The main character immediately ordered him to stop and said that he did not need this. He went on to say that he was a priest who should not have been bewitched by beauty. The man suggested that the girl was not beautiful enough, but the priest said that everything was fine. The man then believed that the pontiff needed someone younger. Arya was shocked by the man's vulgarity. The main character sent the man away and thought that no one dared to encroach on his chastity. Unexpectedly, the Lady Angel suggested that someone else was carrying the next bribe. The pontiff was very happy about this. After some time, a man appeared near the tent, accompanied by servants. He arrived here at the request of the main character. The man said that people were very dependent on the priest, and therefore he would follow him anywhere. The main character suggested that everyone present pray for the former monarch, after which he closed his eyes. The guy mentally turned to the king and asked him to rest in peace, and if it doesn't work out, then it's his own fault. He then added that all the credit was his, and the fault was the monarch's. After this, the main character explained that he had called his subordinates here to discuss a successor. Everyone was very surprised by this. The chief of them asked what the pontiff meant. The guy replied that they needed to choose a successor as soon as possible so that the tribe would be at peace. To begin with, the main character wanted to listen to the opinion of his subordinate because he didn't even know the characters of the heirs. The pontiff asked the man directly what he thought about the young gentleman and the young lady. Lady Angel reported that in the original story, there were several entries about Prince Yule. The royal family began to record history correctly, starting with the third king, and before that, the king was born from an egg, and the moon goddess would come down and kiss the prince on the forehead. The main character asked his subordinates not to worry because he really just wanted to know their opinion. The man decided to start with Mr. Yule and said that the prince was the embodiment of kindness. It even seemed to his subordinates that the guy was too kind and that in general, he was a good person. In addition, he never avoided a battle. The main character thought about how it happened that he had not heard anything bad about the prince. So he asked if the subordinates were sure that the boy had no shortcomings. The servants answered that the prince was overly kind. The main character thought that it was suspicious because it didn't matter how great a person was, his reputation couldn't be perfect. But it seemed to the angel that everything was wonderful. The guy explained that a prudent person was one who was called brave and cruel, and even good people were accused of pretending to be kind. The angel replied that the guy had a negative view of the world, and it didn't seem like the man was intentionally lying to him. The main character believed that they were all pretending because people were trying to be careful among those who were careful and trying to be brave among the brave. But Angela was not convinced. She still believed that the guy had a negative outlook on the world. Then the main character proposed a bet, according to which if the principal turns out to be a great man and the words of those people turn out to be true, then he will admit that the girl is right. The angel asked what they would bet on. The guy suggested playing big and said that he would do whatever she asked. And if he wins, the girl will call him faithful subject until the end of this mission. The angel was speechless. She thought it was all too childish. The guy was sure that she was afraid of losing. Nevertheless, the girl agreed to the terms of the dispute, but threatened that if she won, she would not sit idly by. Then she asked how the greedy man was going to follow the prince and prove his guess. The main character already had an idea of how to do it. Soon night fell. Everyone was already getting ready for bed and only a few soldiers continued their work. The main character, without attracting their attention, left his tent and disappeared into the darkness. After some time, the cries of the pontiff were heard throughout the military camp, calling for help and talking about a secret attack. Everyone immediately came to their senses and went to look for the man. They soon found him lying on the ground. The prince and princess were also alarmed by what had happened. Prince Yule turned to the priest and asked what had happened to him. The protagonist replied that he was attacked by a killer. The man's hand was covered in blood. The principal continued to ask about what the killer looked like, but the pontiff replied that he knew nothing because everything happened too quickly. Then the alarmed princess asked if the man was able to see the attacker's face. The main character replied that he didn't know that either, but he was able to point out the direction in which the attacker ran away. Prince Oil immediately ordered all his subordinates to capture the killer, but he soon changed his mind and said that he would go alone. The princess remained next to the pontiff. She looked around carefully. The girl seemed to have her own thoughts about what had happened, and therefore she carefully looked for confirmation of this. Arya took note of this and said that she highly appreciated the princess's calm reaction. The main characters agreed with this. Mrs. Angel asked why the guy did all this because there was no killer. He explained that he was preparing to catch the prince red-handed, because if he really was sincere as the angel claimed, then the guy would spend the whole night looking for the killer. But the main character himself thought that everything would be different, because if this principal was such a deceiver, then he would invent an attacker even though he didn't even exist. The angel could not believe that the prince would catch an innocent man and pass him off as a criminal, but the pontiff was sure of it. Then the girl assumed that the main character was simply jealous of the prince. The guy didn't respond to this. Angel continued to say that the guy was never truly loved, and that was why it was difficult for him to talk about it because it was his inferiority complex. The main character asked the girl not to doubt his integrity. Angel replied that she couldn't help but do this, because the guy even started this performance to find out the prince's shortcomings. Then the pontiff asked the girl to talk less and said that very soon she would call him faithful subject, but the angel was confident only in her victory. Soon dawn came. The servants loudly announced that the young master had returned. The lady angel was surprised that everything happened as the greedy man said. The main character assumed that the prince had not caught anyone, and he felt sorry because then he would have lost the bet. Prince Yule entered the priest's tent and showed the head of the alleged killer. He said that it was difficult, but he managed to catch him. The servants immediately began to admire the guy, saying that they expected nothing else from the prince, who always worked well. The young gentleman became embarrassed and said that since the priest was now like a second father to him, he could catch the criminal with the hands of his children. The main character thought that the prince was really a good and respectful son. After that, he turned to the lady angel and asked what they would do now, because now she would have to call him faithful subject until the end of the mission. The girl didn't answer. Then the main character asked why he still hadn't heard the angel's sweet voice, because he needed to continue the mission. Still, she admitted her mistake and called the guy a loyal subject. The protagonist reminded that she would have to call him this way until the end of the mission. Then he thought that now all they could do was wait and see what would happen next. The prince asked the priest if everything was okay. The pontiff replied that he was simply speechless and was very touched by the boy's actions, after which he called him the best son. The young gentleman objected and said that the best was the priest. The protagonist thought that the prince very cleverly pretended to be a good boy. Suddenly the princess entered the tent and, interrupting the conversation, turned to the priest. The girl said with annoyance that she looked everywhere, but still couldn't find the attacker. The guy asked his sister not to worry about it because he had already found it. The girl was very surprised. As proof, the principal showed the head of the attacker and said that as soon as he saw him, he started to run, so he had to cut his throat. The shocked princess asked what evidence her brother had that it was he who attacked the priest. There was silence for a moment. The prince looked at his sister with distrust. Finally, he asked why then this man ran away from him, because a thief should not stand out. The girl began to be indignant because the prince killed a man without any investigation, simply because he seemed suspicious to him. The young gentleman said that his sister was evil towards him and added that if she continued to act in this way, she would not be able to catch anyone. The main character was surprised at how emotional the guy became when he was asked an uncomfortable question. The lady angel also noticed this, but the soldiers had a different opinion. They believed that suspicious people had to be executed on the spot, because now they didn't have time for any kind of conversations. The princess asked the soldiers not to be nervous, because even if they managed to defeat the enemy this time, the tribe still had little food and needed to discuss where to move next. Prince Yule responded that food was of course important, but his father had died yesterday, and so he asked if they all needed to grieve at least a little. The princess calmly replied that their father was a great warrior who always guided them. The tribe always survived the winter well because the father was an excellent monarch. That is why now people needed to forget about yesterday's grief and think about food for tomorrow. The young gentleman accused his sister of being a stone without emotions and suggested that she did not even try to find her attacker. The guy continued to say that, even in trouble, the priest grieved for their father and made an offering to the goddess of the moon. But the girl simply did not need all this. For a while there was silence again. All the soldiers were surprised and seemed to fully support the prince's words. The princess calmly replied that her brother tried to understand her, but he was unable to do so. Then the young gentleman assumed that the girl had not spoken to her father at all, and that having followed them all this time, he would definitely be upset. The protagonist observed this and thought that one side was endowed with the skills of pretense and deception of people, and the second was so accurate that she could see the whole essence. They were both worthy of attention. Then he asked the heirs to stop the conflict because they were all going through sad and difficult times. In addition, the goddess of the moon said not to quarrel in war and battle. The prince and princess immediately stopped arguing because the pontiff's authority was high in their eyes. After some time, the main character gathered his close servants in his tent. He ordered everyone to listen to him carefully because he wanted to tell him something important. The pontiff stated that the attack that took place on him was a lie, and Prince Yule himself checked his subordinates and the princess. Everyone was very surprised by what they heard. One of the subordinates immediately asked what happened to the criminal that the young gentleman had caught, after which he suggested that it was all a fictitious drama. The protagonist confirmed this and said that the prince was the real criminal in his own drama, after which he asked his subordinates what they thought about this. Everyone immediately began to say that they could not believe it, but the prince's actions did not resemble the virtue of a monarch. One of the servants said that the Moon tribe should have known about all this right now. He was about to leave the tent when suddenly something flashed very quickly past his head. This frightened the man. The protagonist ominously asked where he was going and ordered him to calm down and sit down. All those present were frightened, so no one dared to object to the priest and only obediently obeyed his orders. The protagonist closed his eyes and concentrated on using his third-level speech skill. The next moment, the guy began to speak, as if on behalf of the prince. He said that he felt offended because he had to find the killer who attacked the priest, but he had no evil intent. He continued to say that he was guilty only of trusting the pontiff's orders. He then admitted guilt for the murder, but justified what happened by saying that he was worried about the future of the tribe. After this, the task window informed the main character that his opponents had complete confidence in him because his speech was successful. After this, the pontiff turned to the servants and noted that they were taken by surprise. All the subordinates were very surprised and did not understand how they could relax their vigilance. The main character thought that if the prince had been such a simple man, he would hardly have become the founder of the country. The servants did not understand what they should do, because if they left everything as it was, then the tribesmen would support the prince. And although the priest had the right to choose the heir, the princess had many opponents. The pontiff continued to think that the principal was a master of deception and cunning, and that his sister, although smart, did not have the broad support of the people. Finally, the main character told the servants to worry because he would personally take care of the prince. He already had a plan that would show the inside of the young master. After this, he suddenly stood up and addressed his subordinates. He ordered them to call Princess Bilua to him because the time had come to see her talents. Night had fallen. It was a great time to talk to the princess without any unnecessary witnesses. The girl came to the pontiff's tent and respectfully greeted him. For some time, they silently looked at the fire. Having carefully examined the girl, the main character firmly decided that he would change the creator of the kingdom to whoever he wanted. Princess Bilua noticed the many items that the servants had given to the pontiff. The protagonist explained that this was necessary in order to comfort the people. He felt awkward because it looked as if he was profiting from everyone's misfortune. The guy thought that now he would like to go to another world. Suddenly, the princess became silent and looked intently at the pontiff. After thinking for a bit, she confidently said that the priest had changed. The main character was very surprised by this. The girl continued to say that it was difficult for her to explain it, but it seemed that after her father's death, the man's gaze changed. The main character was surprised that the girl understood people well even just by looking at them. Lady Angelou said that this was a trait of a person who was worthy of the royal title. The pontiff tried to laugh it off, but thought that he was interested to see whether it was just intuition, or whether the girl could determine something like this on her own. The protagonist asked Princess Bilua if she would like to lead their warriors. After a slight hesitation, the girl replied that it was rather strange that the priest spoke about this. Then she directly asked whether the man had even considered her candidacy for the throne. The girl remembered that it was the pontiff who had once predicted that God's curse would fall upon her. So he sent her as a general into a very risky battle. After this, the princess asked if the man didn't want her to die. The main character was surprised by what he heard and wondered whether the priest was even in his right mind when he said something like that. In order to verify the girl's words, the guy immediately asked Mrs. Angela if it was all true, to which he received an affirmative answer. The protagonist immediately realized that the priest and the princess had never been on friendly terms, and there was no chance that he would appoint the king's daughter as his successor. Having received no answer from the pontiff, the girl asked if she was not right. After thinking for a bit, the priest justified himself by saying that it was the will of the previous generation. Princess Bilua was afraid that it was her deceased father who prevented her from ascending the throne because he was not confident in her. The pontiff explained that His Majesty was very concerned about his successor and did not want the prince and princess to fight for the throne. The main character continued to say that since the girl was the daughter of the fourth wife of the monarch, Anna was never very strong, and the wars did not immediately recognize her. The names therefore the deceased king asked the pontiff to make an ominous prophecy. The princess was shocked by what she heard and could not believe that her father himself was behind the false prophecy. At the same time, Arya admired the main character's improvisation and Mrs. Angel recognized his lying skills. Suddenly, the princess asked why the pontiff told her the truth now. The protagonist thought that because of all this he felt mediocre, even if outwardly it was not noticeable. The priest replied that it was because the young lady had succeeded much more than he had expected. Then the main character admitted that he did not know who to choose between the princess and her brother. The Lady Angel was amazed that the main character lied and did not blush. The guy replied that it was a delicacy for a greedy person. The princess was upset and said that she had already guessed that her father hated her. The pontiff said that this was not so because his master recognized her abilities. That's why the main character asked the girl to forgive her deceased father. Suddenly, Bilua began to tremble. Then she clenched her hands into fists, which indicated that something was bothering her. Lady Angel asked what the main character would do next. The guy replied that he would give the girl confidence because he found her weak spot. Suddenly, the dialogue between the angel and the main character was interrupted because the princess said that she needed to say something. The next moment, the princess announced her suspicion that her brother had killed their father. Not only the main character but also the Lady Angel was surprised by what he heard. The pontiff tried to remain calm but could not help but ask why the princess thought so. The girl replied that her father was surrounded by royal guards, but the arrow flew in his direction. The main character asked if the princess wanted to say that there was a traitor among the guards. The guy received an affirmative answer to this question. There was silence for a while. The pontiff looked at the girl and thought about what he had heard. The guy asked Mrs. Angela if it was possible that the son wanted power and therefore killed his father. The girl answered that it was possible, but there was little evidence for this. Then the main character asked the angel to look for information about what the prince did 3 days before the battle. After this, the pontiff turned to the princess and said that he understood her suspicions, but asked if the girl had any evidence that the prince was behind the murder. The princess replied that she had some dubious physical evidence, after which she recalled the day her father was killed. When everyone was alarmed by the assassination attempt on the ruler, the girl noticed that one of the soldiers was acting suspiciously. He had a bow in his hands with which he could presumably have carried out the assassination attempt, but there was no proof of who it was. The main character was surprised and thought that not everyone had such powers of observation, after which he asked if the girl had been able to detain the killer. The princess replied that she found him, but he was already dead and his head was cut off. The pontiff was shocked by what he heard. The main character asked the girl if she meant that someone killed that soldier so that he wouldn't blab. Princess Bilua replied that in her opinion, this was the only logical explanation. Despite all this, the main character replied that all the girl's words were indirect and were simple suspicions. Unexpectedly, Mrs. Angel reported that she had already completed her search for information. The guy asked if she had noticed any suspicious activity from the prince. The girl replied that she had found a critical situation, and her appearance indicated that she was very unhappy with what she had learned. The main character did not miss his chance to remind about the lost bet and asked the angel to address him correctly. The girls had to call him a loyal subject of the kingdom. After that, the guy asked if it was true that the prince had hired an assassin. Then the angel snapped her fingers and suggested that he see everything for himself. The girl showed the events that happened 3 days ago. Princip reported to the priest that he had hired a killer, after which he asked if there was even a chance that the pontiff would doubt him. The priest asked the prince not to worry and promised that they would find ways to accuse the princess of a crime and then appoint the guy as heir. Prince Yule was pleased with this answer and asked the pontiff to take care of him. The priest was also happy that he worked together with the Lord. The guy asked not to call him sir yet, because it was still too early for that. Afterwards, they joyfully drank to the future of the Moon Tribe. The main character was unable to utter a word after seeing what he saw, and so he just silently looked at the princess. The guy couldn't believe what he saw, but Mrs. Angel said that he was an accomplice in the murder of the monarch, or rather not he, but the priest into whose body he had entered. She continued to say that it was all ironic because the person whose body the main character now possessed was just as evil as he was. Suddenly, the princess turned to the priest and asked if he had heard her, since the man had been sitting silently for a long time. The main character immediately came to his senses and looked at the girl with a worried look. The main character mentally screamed and could not believe that in the end, he turned out to be the villain. Arya decided to cheer up the guy and said that he was not a scoundrel. Then the main character asked who the priest was. The girl answered that he was a heretic whose thinking became devilish. Suddenly, the princess turned to the priest and asked if everything was okay with him. The man explained that all this was unexpected for him, and therefore he withdrew into himself. Then the girl suggested continuing the conversation tomorrow. The protagonist opened the mission windows and looked at the time remaining until the completion of the task. He decided that it was better to listen to everything that was needed now, because he did not know the further consequences, so he told the girl to continue her story. The princess asked the priest if he remembered that when she was looking for the attacker, she came a little later. The guy replied that he remembered it, and that it was then that the girl found the decapitated body of the monarch's killer. This is exactly what the princess wanted to talk about. She had a hunch. The girl said that they had the body of the killer without a head, and the head of the attacker on the pontiff without a body, and this could not be just a coincidence. The princess then suggested that if she connected the body with the head that her brother had brought, then everything would fit, and it would definitely be physical evidence. The Lady Angel said that there was a good way to prove the princess right, but the choice was up to the faithful servant, and if he chooses the prince as the creator, then the kingdom will be rich. Suddenly, Arya asked for the right to vote. Mistress Angel suggested that she had some long story. The next moment, she allowed the girl to speak out, which made Arya happy, because she thought that Angel hated her. First of all, Arya said that the human body and neck cannot be absolutely identical. Moreover, it could turn out that the prince who was engaged in religious scams could bring a different head. The girl also said that it was unknown whether the Moon Tribe would become rich and powerful if Princess Bilua became the creator of the country. After this, the angel asked if a lying and treacherous child could ascend the throne and asked the protagonist to look at the conditions for completing the mission. The conditions only stated that the guy was choosing the creator of the kingdom. Angela was surprised that nothing else was specified. Arya continued to say that at one time she failed to save the tribe from problems, and only a false prophecy laid the foundation for the strengthening of the tribe. The myth was fiction, and the legend was full of lies, but it strengthened the Moon Tribe. And so it seemed to Arya that the path to a strong tribe lay through deception and cunning. The angel reproached the girl for focusing too much on her experience. Arya replied that she knew nothing except what had happened to her, and therefore advised what she had an idea about. She continued to say that even if the prince was a mad killer and a swindler, but he could lead the Moon Tribe to wealth, then he should have been chosen. Clapping their hands, the main characters finally stopped this argument and thanked the girls for their advice. He then said that there was meaning in Arya's words because one couldn't divide things into only right and wrong. The guy continued to say that Arya was still wrong about something, because the most important thing was something else. The main character was sure that the most important thing was to win and be in the winning position, and the princess knew about it. Besides, The guy said that it was necessary to take into account that the prince tried to persuade the pontiff instead of accusing him of bribery, preserving the principles as much as possible. The protagonist believed that this was proof that the prince knew how to win and was patiently waiting for it. It was not perfect, but overall there were no flaws. Still, the pontiff saw the problem in something else, because based on history, it was a complete victory for the prince. But if the level of winning was the same, even though the man was an invited ruler, the main question that the priest asked himself was what to do after winning, and the key to determining the result lay in what kind of kingdom he wanted to see. Finally, the main character decided that it was time to check whether the prince and princess would act thinking only about themselves or about the lunar time. After this, the pontiff asked Mrs. Angela to write her works from the past. The girl resisted, saying that writing ancient stories was not easy. When the main character expressed regret that the girl would have to suffer for some time in order to do this job. Still, he told Angel to rest, because he understood that writing ancient history was a heavy burden. The girl was very surprised that the main character cared about her. The guy confirmed this and said that in any case, she could not find the information right now. Lady Angel encouraged the pontiff by saying that there was still a lot of time left before the mission was completed, but the guy said that he did not want to delay this task because the priest was rotting right before his eyes. The girl responded to this by saying that the main character definitely shouldn't have said that bribes are bad. The guy justified himself by saying that it was before he found out that he was a complete scumbag, after which he asked whether the priest would take bribes to calm the tribe. Besides, the guy remembered the servant who had recently brought a girl to him. He had an expression on his face as if something was wrong with the pontiff today. The Lady Angel was surprised and didn't even know how to react to this. The guy added that she didn't yet know the most important thing. The main character said that not only did the pontiff respect the lustfully corrupt freak, but he was also a participant in the attempted murder. After this, the loyal subject declared that this kingdom was rotten even before it was created. So the guy asked Mrs. Angela to hurry up and find out what kind of country the prince and princess would do. Suddenly, someone shouted loudly that the camp was attacked. The protagonist came out of his tent and saw a sentry sounding the alarm and loudly asking his comrades to take up arms. The pontiff immediately asked what had happened and why there was such a mess around. But the soldiers themselves did not know the reason and asked the man to stay inside the tent. The protagonist found it strange that the enemies attacked just when their king died. After this, the pontiff took out an axe and ordered the soldiers to follow him. He intended to deal with the enemies. The Lady Angel was surprised by this and said that it was dangerous, but the main character replied that it was dangerous to do nothing. The girl did not understand what the guy meant. Then the priest asked which tribe would recognize a man who simply sat idly by during an enemy attack. The loyal subject led the warriors and thought that despite the danger, the time had come for him to show himself. Meanwhile, a group of enemies were already approaching the camp. So far, they were only held back by one soldier who had already begun to lose hope of salvation. The next moment, one of the enemies received a blow to the head, from which he fell dead. The reason for this was the main character, who accurately threw an axe at the enemy. The soldiers did not believe that the priest took part in the battle. Suddenly, the pontiff activated the speech skill, after which he began to loudly say that their master was watching them and they should not be so pitifully attacked, so he asked the warriors to raise their weapons. This speech inspired the soldiers. They were glad that the priest was nearby and the soul of their master was watching over them. One of the enemies was surprised that the Moon tribe had a leader who led the soldiers because he heard that their king had recently died. This man turned out to be the leader of the opponents. The main character looked attentively and did not take her eyes off him. Finally, he took up the axe and asked the moon goddess to allow his attack to deal a fatal blow to the enemy. After that, the protagonist activated the third-level prophecy skill and took careful aim with his weapon. The next moment, the pontiff swung his axe sharply and threw it at his enemy. This attack was successful and the enemy leader immediately fell to the ground dead. His subordinates were shocked that their leader was killed so quickly. The protagonist was pleased with the result of his attack and therefore shouted loudly that the goddess had answered his prayer. This encouraged the warriors even more. Moreover, the priest said that the goddess ordered them to live and the enemies to die. After this, the pontiff commanded all his subordinates to kill the enemies. Everyone immediately rushed to carry out the order. The soldiers fought the enemy fearlessly, leaving them no chance of escape. The main character thought that the tribe was full of corruption and scandals, but now he had the opportunity to eliminate these shortcomings. He believed that the most important thing for the kingdom was to know how to win. The main character looked at the battle and thought that the kingdom that had forgotten the taste of victory would eventually perish. This is why the pontiff believed that he simply needed to win. The subordinates informed the priest that the enemies were already advancing and asked him to give them the order to kill them. The main character ordered to deal with the enemies, but it seemed that he didn't care much about it. Suddenly he told the servants that now he had no time to worry about these weaklings. After this, the subject probably looked at the moon and thought about something. Finally, he ordered the prince and princess to be called to him, because today he wanted to choose an heir. After some time, the heirs were already standing in front of the pontiff. Prince Yule asked if the priest had been wounded during the battle. The main character greeted first the lady, and then the young gentleman. The prince noticed this, which made him suspicious. The pontiff thought that he did it on purpose because he wanted to see the prince's reaction. After that, he asked how the heirs felt and whether everything was okay with them. The guy was the first to answer and said that everything was fine thanks to the priest's care. He also said that he heard that the pontiff did an excellent job. Princess Bilua thanked the man for his efforts because he united the warriors in time and reduced the losses. Mrs. Angel noticed that the prince simply praised the priest, and the princess described his efforts in detail. The main character said that the heirs were completely different, although related. Then the guy thought that duplicity usually came easy, but it was impossible to wear a mask forever, and one day his fellow tribesmen would understand that their monarch was not who he claimed to be. After this, the main character noticed the prince's armor and realized that he was simply pretending to fight, but in fact, remained in the rear. Arya was delighted that the guy noticed this. The pontiff continued to say that in any case, saving oneself when danger appeared was not the worst decision that could have been made. However, the boy also noticed that Princess Bilua's armor was damaged and stained with the blood of enemies. This is what a warrior's real armor looked like. The pontiff considered that the girl was indifferent to her feelings and assessed everything in accordance with clear standards. She also knew how to fight for her tribe in case of danger. Mrs. Angel suggested that the main character would make his choice right now. The pontiff confirmed the girl's guess and said that he had already chosen the heir who would take the throne. Lady Angel was proud that her loyal subject was selflessly thinking about the future kingdom. The girl remembered how the main character told her that over time, people changed, and now he was a true, loyal subject of the kingdom. But suddenly the pontiff said that this simplified the next scenario. Mrs. Angel asked what that meant. The guy explained that his next mission was in the second year of the creation of the Republic, which meant that a kingdom was being created now. He continued to say that now they were choosing a person based on the next mission, and therefore they should choose a queen to make it easier. Mrs. Angel was unhappy that the main character was guided solely by self-interest and considered that he really was trash. Suddenly, the pontiff announced to everyone that he had been chosen by the moon goddess to appoint the next monarch who would rule the moon tribe. The priest continued to say that at first he wanted to take his time and make a reasonable decision, but changed his mind when he saw the enemy's attack today. The prince assumed that the heir would be chosen right now. The next moment, the protagonist stated that the principal was suspicious. The guy did not understand what the priest meant. The pontiff said that their master died not long ago, but only a day had passed, and the enemy had already learned about it. This could only be explained by the fact that someone had informed the enemy. The prince was very surprised to hear this. The main character stated that there was a traitor among them who passed the information to the enemy. The soldiers were very surprised and could not believe that there was a traitor in their tribe. Mistress Angel asked the main character if he was really sure of this. The guy replied that it was not important because the most important thing was to increase the understanding and vigilance of the tribe's inhabitants. The angel still didn't fully understand what was happening. The guy laughed at the fact that the girl was naive, like a blank slate. The main character then explained that thanks to his lies, the people of the tribe would unite against the traitor. Usually the monarch would gather and unite the tribe against the enemies, but now the moon tribe had no master, so now they will unite thanks to the pontiff. The priest addressed the people and said that now was not the time to relax, check, and evaluate, because the unknown traitor was waiting for the moment to attack. The soldiers, hearing these words, began to be indignant and were already intending to catch the traitor. Miss Angel noted that the merciless retribution for betrayal corresponded to the concept of the previous mission. The protagonist confirmed this and said that now the soldiers could not fight each other because the enemy attack was expected. Meanwhile, the soldiers had already grabbed their weapons, their eyes burning with anger, wanted revenge for the betrayal. People thought it strange that their master was killed by an arrow and wanted to quickly find and kill the traitor. The soldiers were watched by the prince and princess. The boy was alarmed by the sight of an uncontrolled crowd that wanted to kill. The main character looked at the frightened guy and thought that he was still young and did not know how to control a crowd of angry people. The pontiff then announced that he had already asked the goddess of the moon who had betrayed their tribe and asked everyone to listen carefully to the goddess's oracle. The guy activated the speech and prophecy skill and said that the traitor was one of his colleagues whom people respected very much. Also, the traitor was a child who had his father's blood on his hands. The priest continued to say that the traitor was the child of the deceased master. One of them betrayed the tribe and killed his father. This speech was a success and all the people trusted the main character. Seemingly calm, Prince Yule turned to the pontiff and asked him what kind of prophecy it was. In fact, he was nervous and wondering what the hell was going on, since he had never spoken to the priest about this happening. The main character thought that he was betraying the guy, but he was happy with it. The pontiff replied that it was an oracle from the goddess of the moon. The prince looked around with fear, trying to find a way out for himself. The priest was calm, because it was already dark, and most of the powerful weapons were guarded. The main character then turned to Princess Bilua and asked if she had any ideas about who the traitor could be. The girl looked at the priest and remained silent for a while, still not daring to tell what she knew. Finally, she collected her thoughts and began to say what she had already said to the pontiff. The girl said that she saw an enemy soldier missing one finger on his right hand shoot at her father. The next moment, she expressed suspicion that it was her brother who hired this killer. The prince began to be indignant and say that his sister accused him without any evidence. The main character thought that at such a time, such a reaction was involuntary, but there was no evidence. The soldiers began to surround the prince. The frightened boy began to say that he served his father more sincerely than anyone else, and everyone knew about it. The protagonist immediately realized that the prince was manipulating people's emotions and believed that this strategy was better than the previous one. The guy continued to say that when the priest was almost killed, he personally led the search for the attacker. Suddenly, Princess Bilua said that she was sure that it was all just a pretense. Prince Yule didn't expect to hear this and asked what his sister meant. The girl replied that it seemed strange that they found the attacker too quickly. The princess also said that they needed to conduct an interrogation and find out who was behind the man who attempted to kill the priest. But the prince cut off his head so that he would remain silent. The prince began to get even more nervous and literally screamed that he had been set up so that the soldiers would hear him and believe him. The guy continued to say that he didn't think that his sister would treat him like that and would actually try to kill her relative. The main character thought that the level of difficulty was different because it was not so easy to lie. But on the other hand, the princess could only point out a few suspicious moments. The prince said that if the oracle was right, then it was his sister who arranged his father's death since he was not guilty. Suddenly, the protagonist stretched out his hand and addressed the young master. Silence reigned all around. It was interrupted by the voice of the priest, who asked the prince to be silent for a second. The main character turned to the warriors and said that he needed to tell them something. The guy assumed that they already suspected that the prince was planning that attack, but that was not the point. The next moment, the pontiff admitted that it was not the young gentleman who had staged that drama, but he himself. He explained this by saying that he was interested in how the soldiers would react to the fact that he had planned an attack and caused a stir. Prince Yule was worried and did not understand what the priest wanted to say with all this. The main character said that the young gentleman's guilt was that he invented an attacker who did not exist. The guy continued to say that the goddess of the moon would be very surprised by this, because it was a real miracle that the prince created something that did not exist. The pontiff's subordinates immediately confirmed his words and said that he had told them in advance that this was a test for the prince and princess. The soldiers were outraged that the young gentleman had lied and, moreover, killed an innocent man. Prince Yule tried to justify himself by saying that he had simply caught a suspicious person in a hurry. Then the princess said that she had the decapitated body of the murderer and her brother brought the head without the body. The main character suggested connecting the body with the head, and if they match, it will prove that the prince conspired with the killer and then accused him of attempted attack. He also said that even a goddess would turn away from her principle after the execution. Hearing this, the princess wanted to punish her brother herself. With a sharp swing, she drew her sharp sword, as she was already ready to use it immediately. The girl asked permission to fight a duel with her brother because she wanted to defend the honor of her parents. The main character was surprised and thought that it was a worthy spectacle. Lady Angel said that justice had prevailed because the princess would be the accuser and not the monarch, since the accuser could not be the judge. The main character also added that besides this, the princess was a Western daughter, and even if she becomes a monarch, legitimizing it will be a problem, and the princess will be drawn into problems. Mistress Angel asked if the princess hadn't participated in battles before. The guy asked if she had any evidence to believe so. The angel replied that what the guy had shown all this time was proof. The main character replied that in any case, the princess knew how to win, and now she was proving it. The soldiers were delighted and responded positively to the idea of a duel between the heirs. The only one who was against this was Prince Yule, who asked his sister not to do this. The girl did not listen to the traitor and immediately attacked him. The very first attack was successful because she managed to wound the prince's hand. Prince Yule realized that his sister was determined to kill him, and a duel could not be avoided. The guy tried with all his might to avoid the girl's quick attacks. Bilyua had no intention of sparing her brother and therefore was not careful. The guy could only run away. The soldiers who watched this duel were surprised that the prince was so weak and said that in his place a child would have done better. It was already deep night, but no one left because everyone was interested in how this duel would end. Despite the length of the fight, Princess Bilyua was still full of strength and determination. The same could not be said about her brother, who could barely hold a sword. The main character thought that all this was in order to instill in people the idea of incompetence. In addition, it was not a duel but an execution, after which the princess became the creator of the kingdom. Suddenly, Arya reminded the pontiff of the conditions for completing the mission. He thought that the conditions for completing it were for him to choose an heir, so he didn't understand what could go wrong. He suddenly wondered if he would be able to choose the princess as his creator if she killed the prince in this duel. Mrs. Angel said that the guy had already made his choice and asked if it wouldn't be better if the princess won the throne herself. She continued to say that they had done a lot of good work and so the mission would not be a complete failure, but it would also be impossible to achieve the same results as last time. Meanwhile, Prince Yule tried to attack his sister and used all his skills to do so. However, the girl was a more experienced fighter and was therefore able to easily repel the guy's attack. The prince could not stand on his feet and therefore fell to the ground. It seemed that he could no longer continue the duel. The princess realized that everything was over, and so she headed towards her defeated brother. The girl pinned the prince to the ground with her foot and prepared to execute the traitor who was responsible for her father's death. The main character watched the princess and thought that the moment of complete culmination had arrived. For him, it was a moment of despair because the mission could have failed. Suddenly, the prince screamed at the top of her voice that all this was because of the priest. These words made the girl stop, although everything was already ready for the execution of the traitor. The prince continued to say that the priest was the first to talk about the murder of his father. Along with this, the guy thought that he would not die alone, but would take the pontiff with him to the grave. The soldiers were shocked to hear this and could not believe that a priest could kill the chief. At the same time, they heard the sound of Karabisu's axe dance. The main characters smiled slyly and mentally thanked the prince for telling them everything. Yule continued to blame the pontiff for everything and say that he had evidence. The princess looked at the main character with suspicion. The guy thought about the fact that he had two options, and under normal circumstances, he would have chosen the first one. He laughed loudly and said that he did not know that the prince had evidence. The soldiers were very surprised because the pontiff actually acknowledged everything that the prince said about him. Mistress Angel asked what the guy was doing and whether the loyal subject had gone crazy. The protagonist raised his axe and replied that he was on a mission. After this, he threw the weapon with all his might at the prince's head, thereby instantly executing him. The pontiff thought that the one who had founded the kingdom was now resting in peace. He admitted that the prince had been quite clever, but everything was wrong with him. Having taken the axe out of the prince's body, the main character turned to Bilyua and said that it was her turn next. The girl did not understand what all this meant. The pontiff explained that from that moment on, the girl would be the new monarch of the Moon tribe. The princess said that it was treason because the commandment said that only those who had signs of nobility could be leaders. The priest replied that the commandment was wrong and that in the end the tribe needed a strong leader. The guy thought to himself that he was denying the commandments that he himself had established because they were inappropriate. Suddenly, ideas appeared among the soldiers that the priest was the strongest because he was able to kill enemies and even the leader and the prince. Since the priest abandoned his commandments, the skill of speech was replaced by the skill of incitement. This was the reason for the emergence of unexpected ideas among the soldiers. The next moment, the protagonist shouted that people should not be bound by the old rules or obey the blood of the silver moon eyes. The princess was very surprised by this statement. After this, the main character turned to several leaders of powerful clans that were part of the Moon Tribe because he believed that they would not help the future of the tribe. He ordered them to raise their arms, for the time had come for their sacred duty. It was all a bluff, but it worked perfectly. One of the men immediately killed the clan leader to whom the priest was addressing, believing that he was a traitor. The soldiers, seeing this, were frightened because they understood that a large-scale battle could no longer be avoided. The main character thought that everything went just perfectly. After that, he turned to the princess and asked if she understood everything, or if she should explain it. The girl invited that she would kill the priest. The man laughed and, calling the girl cursed, suggested that she try to kill him. The next moment, the main character attacked the girl with all his might with his axe. The princess managed to protect the flint axe and the iron sword, causing bright sparks to fly in all directions. The main character seemed to have gone mad. He said that he didn't expect anything else from the damn girl. The princess heard this and was very surprised and asked if it was all a lie. Then she asked if the priest had cursed her on purpose and the father had recognized her. All of this was a lie. The main character asked what would happen if that was the case. The girl was upset and said that for the first time she met someone she could rely on, but the priest betrayed her. The pontiff, with a mad grin, said that the princess's attacks were predictable. The girl was still shocked by the priest's betrayal and was therefore ready to fight him to the death. Suddenly, the main character raised his axe up because he wanted to make a statement. The guy said that the winner of this duel will be chosen by the goddess and will become the angel's agent. The protagonist looked closely at the princess's reaction. He was wondering if his prophecy skill had worked on her. The rest of the people were in a state of extreme excitement. The mission window reported that the prophecy was successful. The main character thought that everything went well, but he still had one more thing to do. The princess wanted to ask the priest about something, but suddenly her words were interrupted. The next moment, the priest was very close to the girl and it seemed as if he was attacking her. The main character looked at the princess with a serene gaze because he didn't even try to harm her. Bilua was surprised that she was still standing on her feet because she knew the pontiff's skill and did not understand why he had not yet attacked her. Suddenly, a sharp iron sword pierced the soft flesh, causing scarlet splashes of blood to fly in all directions. The protagonist winced in sharp pain but tried his best to stay conscious and cope with this ordeal. The princess, realizing what had just happened, became very upset and almost started crying. The pontiff thought that the girl shouldn't have cried because it wasn't her who was hurt. The princess immediately approached the dying priest to ask him about everything. The girl timidly asked if he had impaled himself on her sword on purpose. The protagonist turned to the princess and said that her position was confident and pure, so he asked to save it for the future of the Moon Tribe. Bilua leaned over the priest's body and begged him not to die while the battle raged behind her. The pontiff barely had the strength to speak. He asked the girl to stop pulling him because it was painful. The princess promised that she would cure the man. The main character responded that the people around her were looking at her, and curing the leader of the traitors was not the best option. He then asked the girl to execute him and all the traitors, because in this way she would be able to win the trust and respect of her fellow tribesmen. After this, the priest said that he had chosen the girl as the heir to the throne. Having said this, the guy felt relieved. The princess swung her sword. Finally, the main character said that he would never forget the girl. The next moment, the blade flew at great speed towards the pontiff's neck. The mission window reported that the person into whom the main character had possessed had died, and the mission was ending regardless of the remaining time. Eventually, the boy found himself in the ruins of the kingdom. He thought about how he felt like he was abandoned naked in a dark alley. Arya said that she was touched by the protagonist's actions. The angel said that it was a shame because this performance was only to make the princess understand that he chose her. The guy replied that a whole play could have been made out of this. At this moment, the mission window congratulated the guy on successfully completing the task. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Arya appeared, running cheerfully towards the prophet and praising him for his hard work. At the very last moment, the main character dodged the girl's embrace, who was very surprised by this. The guy said he was glad to hear the praise but asked not to come too close to him. The girl suggested that she was disgusting to the prophet. Lady Angel reassured Arya by saying that this deceiver valued chastity. I heard this girl admire the main character even more, saying that he was a true prophet and simply a wonderful person. Suddenly, the guy began to receive messages that he had completed the mission and was able to choose the next monarch, and he also destroyed the forces that could become a stumbling block for the Immaculate Monarch. The main character was pleased with himself and thought that all his efforts had paid off. After that, the guy began to receive rewards for successfully completing the task. The ghosts immediately got to work. To begin with, they built a palace that gave the main character the skill of the art of control of the second level. Then the spirits began to build a village that would provide craft skills. Thanks to the construction of the barracks, the main character gained the skill of archery, the skill of wielding a spear and an axe. Suddenly, something caught the guy's attention. Because of this, he looked surprised and worried. The reason for this was the statue of Karabisu, which was now standing without a head. The system window reported that all effects that were associated with this statue were temporarily suspended. The guy was surprised and so asked what was happening here. Arya assumed that it was because the prophet had not been on duty for a long time. The angel also noticed that the statue was now in the corner. Angel assumed that something had happened during the recent mission. The guy didn't understand what kind of incident he could have caused Angel, and she herself didn't fully understand everything. She said that the entire landscape of the underworld was the result of the guy's actions. In other words, he did something that interfered with the transfer of the stone statue. The protagonist remembered that he had recently chosen the king's daughter as the next monarch in order to cleanse the princess of her deep-rooted vices, but did not understand how this was connected with the statue. The guy then suggested that on the next mission, he could ruin everything even more. Mistress Angel confirmed this. The main character thought that everything was fine with the axe technique, and therefore he needed to bring everything back to normal. After that, he looked at something. It was a huge Tier 2 monument that was given as a reward for completing a side mission. It was a monument of the first queen, which gave the ability to read minds, but only 3 times per mission. Additional information about the monument says that all who spoke out against the blood of the moon will be punished by heaven and buried in pouring rain. The guy admired this. Suddenly, Mrs. Angel informed the greedy man that the next mission would be difficult. The guy asked what she meant. The girl replied that the guy would understand everything himself when the mission began. The main character did not take these words seriously and simply opened the mission window. He was very surprised when he noticed that the difficulty of the mission had been increased. Mrs. Angel asked the guy to remember one thing, namely that what goes around comes around. The guy thought about these words but couldn't understand anything, so he had a bad feeling. Nevertheless, he immediately went on the next mission. The main character thought about the fact that every time he opened his eyes, there was a new situation in front of him. He was a savage on a sudden hunt. There were times when he found himself tied up and had to kneel obediently in the incessant rain. The guy even found himself in the middle of a battlefield, so he thought that the situation couldn't get any worse. However, he was wrong, because he came to his senses from a strong blow to the back. A rough male voice ordered him to get up. A man with a whip in his hand called the main character a traitor and ordered him to go carry stones. The guy thought about how his back hurt a lot from the blows of the whip and did not understand why he had to carry stones. Looking around, he saw many workers who obediently carried huge waves. They were controlled by several overseers who did not give the people rest. The main character turned to Mrs. Angel and asked what all this was about, but he did not have time to get an answer because the warden again ordered him to drag the stone. The guy tried to lift the boulder that was lying under his feet, but it turned out to be much more difficult than it could have been. Not only did the main character inhabit the body of a slave, but he was also a child who could barely hold a stone. Mrs. Angelov said again that the guy reaped what he sowed, after which she asked if the guy knew how he took possession of the priest's body. The main character replied that he managed to move into the body of the pontiff because his ancestors were Karabisu and Moso. The angel confirmed this. At first, the guy thought that he had entered people's bodies by accident, but now he realized that he had now received a body that was owned by a relative of a priest who had been executed after treason 30 years ago. The guards yelled at the slaves, calling them a bunch of treacherous parasites and saying that betrayal was warm in their veins, so they needed to pay their debt with work. The main character thought that he hadn't even started yet, and this mission already seemed like a complete mess to him. The overseer ordered the slaves to bring me food so that they could earn their bread through physical labor. The main character thought that in order to successfully complete the task, he justified Princess Bilua. Lady Angel asked the guy to rejoice because in this world, all the reforms he adopted were successful. The guy replied that he never thought that he would become a slave. Angel was pleased that this greedy man paid for his actions. Suddenly, the main character turned his attention to something. He was surprised and looked in one direction, fascinated. In front of him, the guy saw a huge unfinished tower. He immediately realized that this was the capital of the kingdom, but so far there was absolutely nothing here. The main character decided to look at the mission window. He needed to allow the lunar faction to lay down the kingdom for 1 month. The guy didn't understand how he was supposed to do it. He did not understand how a child, and even a slave, could cope with this. The main character thought that he needed to meet with the leader of Bilua and recreate the kingdom anew. Mrs. Angel asked the greedy man not to dramatize because he was given a whole month to complete this task. The guy thought that no matter how much time he was given, he still wouldn't be able to cope, and therefore asked the angel to do something about it. The girl replied that it was impossible. The main character said that he understood this, but believed that the girl could not be so insensitive because he was the only one who had such an urgent mission. The angel listened to the guy and replied that he had a rather sweet side. The main character added that he had always been a cutie. Arya thought it was cool. The protagonist confirmed this and said that it was an axiom. The lady angel assumed that the guy had finally gone crazy, but the greedy man replied that he had always been in his right mind, after which he threw the stone on the ground. Suddenly, the warden began to scold the main character for frowning and suggesting that he had not been spanked for a long time. The guy tried to justify himself by saying that he simply got a speck of dust in his eye. Hearing this, the warden ordered the guy to quickly return to work because he still had a lot to do before sunset. The main character cheerfully ran to carry out the order. Soon he began to resent the fact that he was not allowed to even show emotions on his own face. He asked Mrs. Angela if this situation did not infuriate her. The girl asked the greedy man not to worry because she could not believe that he could not somehow sort this out. She continued to say that they would find a way out of this situation. And if it didn't work out, they would respond in kind, because she no longer doubted the guy's abilities. The main character was surprised and asked why the girl was suddenly showering him with compliments, because if someone suddenly changed their behavior, it meant that they didn't have long left. Arya was glad that Mrs. Angel finally understood the true value of the prophet. The girl replied that she simply acknowledged the facts, and then asked the greedy man if he had already come up with anything. The main character decided that first he needed to somehow get closer to Moon's lineage, and to do this he needed to rise higher so that his origins would not be an obstacle. The angel asked if it was really that hard for the guy to drag the boulder. The main character replied that he was just trying to conserve more strength. The guy looked at the impunity of the guards and thought that in such a situation it no longer mattered how hard he tried, because he would still remain a nobody. Suddenly a man shouted loudly and asked everyone to be attentive. The slaves and overseers immediately stopped their work and began to listen attentively to the man. The servant loudly announced that Chief Bilua had arrived to inspect the progress of the work. All the slaves immediately fell to their knees and bowed low to the ruler. The protagonist thought that now he understood what the law on possession meant. It was concluded that if the possessed body was following in the footsteps of the previous one, then the only way to complete the mission was to take possession of that body. The angel said that the goddess could not entrust him with an impossible task. The guy replied that he had 5 ways to complete this task. After this, the main character looked at the ruler who was passing by, but the guy could not see his face. Then he turned to Angel and said that he urgently needed some kind of stamp on his face. The girl did not understand what the guy was going to do with this stamp. She also asked if in this situation he could know where Bilua was now. The guy answered that this was why he needed the angel's help. The girl began to get angry because the main character perceived the apostle and the servants of God as just tools. The guy replied that they should have helped each other because they were in the same boat. After this, the main character asked Arya to find Bilua, and he instructed Angel to look into the leader's past and leave only the key facts that were known only to him. The Lady Angel obeyed this order and inspired the passing Bilua with the idea of looking at the main character, who had already raised his head. The ruler and the slave met each other's eyes. The protagonist immediately recognized the leader as Princess Bilua. The guy saw the girl's face and thought that everything was fine, but people associated with religion no longer trusted him because it was difficult to use them, and therefore another skill was needed. He remembered King Shi's golden palace, which gave the effect of reading minds 3 times per mission. The protagonist immediately used this skill. The color of his eyes changed, and his gaze became intense and piercing. He heard the thoughts of the leader. The girl looked at the child and recognized him as the offspring of the last descendant of the pontiff. After that, the guy grabbed his head and was surprised at how his skill worked. Angel asked what he would do next. The main character replied that he would figure everything out and then accept his fate. The chief looked at the child and thought about how she had promised the priest to remember him, but she had simply left this child as her last descendant, although she should not have done so. The main character was glad that the pontiff was not indifferent to the ruler after all, and suggested that everything could be much simpler than it seemed at first glance. Bilyua turned away from the guy and was already about to go on about her business. Suddenly, the main character began to cry and turned to the ruler and asked how he ended up there. Mrs. Angel did not understand what the guy was doing and how he could burst into tears so quickly. He explained that it was like breathing, after which he asked the girl to tell him about the leader's past. The main character turned to the ruler again and wanted to tell him about his dream, but the guard stopped him. Despite this, the guy shouted loudly that he had a dream connected with the ruler. He began to remember that when he was just a child, on that moonlit night filled with the sounds of clanging knives, the princess held a knife and had a moon on her head. Suddenly, the warden interrupted the protagonist's story by hitting him with a whip to silence him. The men did not understand what nonsense this slave was telling and asked the ruler to apologize for their carelessness. Suddenly, the chief waved her hand, ordering her subordinates to release the child and allow him to speak. The girl asked the main character what she said in that dream. The guy looked at the ruler with eyes filled with tears and replied that the girl said that she would not forget him. Bilyua remembered that night very well and was therefore surprised when she heard such details from the slave. The main character continued to say that this was not all, because he had many more dreams with the leader. Bilyua asked what kind of dreams they were. The guy immediately turned to Mrs. Angel and asked her to tell him something that only Bilyua knew. The girl was not happy about this, but still agreed to help the main character. She began to show the past of the leader of the Moon tribe. The main character began to tell that the girl was sitting all alone in her tent and wondering how much more blood would have to be spilled before they would find a place where they could grow wheat. The guy also saw how the girl fought with a dragon in order to save the lives of people from her tribe. The guy also recounted a dream where Bilyua was completely alone in the mountains and broke through the flames, while saying that now was the time when bad fame was better than ignorance. Suddenly, the leader interrupted the protagonist's story and asked him to stop. The guy immediately shut his mouth because he realized that he had said too much. Bilyua looked at the child and asked if he really saw all this in his dreams. The main character was glad that the girl fell for the trick, after which he swore on his life that it was true. Hearing this, the leader ordered his subordinates to immediately take this child to the palace. The main character was very surprised by this. After listening to the child, the leader ordered her subordinates to take him to the palace. The protagonist was happy to hear this. The servant asked his mistress if she was sure of her decision, since the other tribes were hostile towards the Moon tribe after the Night of the Axe. The girl asked not to remind her because she was there when it all happened. The main character noticed that the girl used military symbols in everyday life, which meant that in her soul she was still a warrior. The servant, whose name was Sivu, looked at the boy as if he was indignant that he dared to appeal to the rulers. The main character did his best to portray himself as a naive child who didn't understand anything and just wanted to survive. The servant continued to tell his mistress that bringing the traitor's relatives to the palace was not the best idea. The protagonist was surprised that this man recognized his ancestors. Then the guy will think that in the place of this servant he would have done the same, after which he remembered how he dissuaded Her Majesty from allowing the relative of the rebellious traitor to set foot in the palace. The protagonist realized that the servant who accompanied Bilyua was driven only by true devotion. The leader of the tribe replied that she had called this child to the palace precisely because of his pedigree. Sivu was very surprised by this. After this, the girl said that the man who stood behind the Knight of the Axe was the first prophet and a purebred descendant of Mosuo. Sivu, let's assume that this child could also have the gift of prophecy. The main character thought that of course he would have this gift because Arya was already sitting in the temple. Bilyua also believed in this because there was no other explanation why the child could talk about such things. The guy thought that it was thanks to Mrs. Angel who told him about the past of the lady. The girl ordered her subordinate to wash, dress, and feed the child and then take him to her room. Sivu immediately obeyed the order. After some time, the chief and her Ovida returned to the palace. The main building of the kingdom looked completely empty and deserted. At this time, the main character was taking a bath and thought that it was amazing because this is how a civilized person should live. Arya completely agreed with the guy. Suddenly, the main character began to cover himself and asked the girl to turn away. Arya didn't understand what was wrong because she married him and gave birth to his children. The guy will answer that then it wasn't him but Moso. Mistress Angel noticed that the body that the main character now possessed was still not his. Then the guy relaxed and said that the girls could look at him as much as they wanted. After some time, the main character finished his water procedures and got dressed. He was pleased and silently asked to give him a silk blanket so that he could go to sleep. Suddenly, the servant asked the child in a rough voice not to be mistaken. The main character was immediately taken aback. Everything looked as if the man could read his thoughts. Sivu continued to say that the rotten blood did not deserve to step over the threshold of the Silver Palace and advised the guy not to talk to the leader at all. The main character thought that this servant reminded him of someone, and this made him want to tease him. The angel asked the guy not to do this because he was not in that position. The guy understood that he couldn't use Karabisu's abilities. This meant that he would have to make Siva his puppy for the duration of this mission. The next moment, the guy tried to pretend that he wanted to say something but couldn't bring himself to do so. The servant immediately noticed this and asked what had happened to him. The guy timidly replied that he was glad to have Shivu, but he didn't understand why the child was telling him this. The protagonist continued to say that he saw the servant in his dream. After that, he asked Mrs. Angela to quickly show him some of the servant's memories. The child said that the leader of the Moon Tribe found him dying of hunger. In gratitude, the boy began to strive to become the best warrior of the tribe in order to protect the dear leader. In the end, he succeeded and became a fighter of the Royal Guard. The main character continued to say that he was happy to see Siva in a dream because he constantly protected Her Majesty. The servant responded to this that the child was indeed a relative of the traitor, after which he asked what kind of nonsense he was telling. The protagonist was surprised that Sivu was unwavering. The servant continued to say that his mistress believed that the child would be useful, but he did not agree with this, and therefore asked the boy to watch what he said. The main character apologized for upsetting the man and said that he could not remain silent because the faithful servant had a great destiny. The guy continued to say that he could not have seen Siva meeting with the leader during the time of famine, so he was sure that the servant believed him. The child asked the man to trust him because the servant was destined to become the greatest warrior and a shield that would protect the dear leader in difficult times. The main character bowed respectfully and asked for forgiveness, saying that he would know his place. After that, he thought that he had succeeded. After some time, the guy found himself in the throne room and obediently waited for the appearance of Her Majesty. Lady Angel asked what he would do next. The guy replied that he had already set several goals. Firstly, he wanted to rid himself of this slave status. Secondly, he wanted to start a family and have children. The angel asked if this was not contrary to the chastity dinner. The protagonist replied that he would be able to continue to inhabit bodies only if he had children. The girl did not exaggerate because he could still move into the body of his closest relatives. The protagonist believed that he needed to narrow his options because after this mission, the intervals between them would become shorter and social status was difficult to change if it had already become entrenched. After that, Angel asked about the mission to create a kingdom. The guy replied that this was his third goal. The girl reminded the guy that if he failed the mission, the kingdom would go and he would disappear. The main character replied that if he was a slave again in the next mission, he could give up and die right now. Arya tried to be impressed by the guy's determination and lack of fear of death, but failed and will try next time. The protagonist did not understand what this meant. The next moment, Bilua entered the throne room and asked the guy for forgiveness for the wait. Meanwhile, the first day of the mission came to an end. Darkness enveloped everything around, and only a bright moon was visible in the sky. Bilua sat on her throne and asked the main character if he knew who he was. The guy replied that he was told that he was the descendant of a great sinner. The girl was surprised by this. For a while she was silent because she was thinking about something. The main character thought that he should have tormented her with guilt more. The boy said that since he was born a sinner, he believed that his punishment should be obsessive dreams of a world to which he could never belong. He continued to say that everything changed when he met the leader. After that, the guy bowed low and asked the girl to tell him that he was not born for eternal pain, but to help her. After this, Bilua asked to tell what specific power the main character possessed. The guy replied that he could faintly sense what kind of life a person had lived and predict events that would happen. Hearing this, the leader asked if the main character could only do this in his sleep. The guy replied that he could do it while he was awake, because he saw things suddenly, but it exhausted him and therefore he could not do it all the time. The main character looked at the girl and thought that now she understood how he could be used. Of course, he lied a little, but he had no other choice. The angel asked if the guy really thought he could achieve the desired level of freedom. The main character replied that of course he could, because Bilyua could decide to free him from slavery. The angel did not understand why the leader condemned the pontiff's relatives to slavery if she could have saved them. The guy explained that she did this so that the purges would look justified to everyone. Next, Angel asked if the guy blamed the leader for the fact that she was unable to prevent it. The protagonist replied that of course she was to blame because she was the leader. The angel thought that the chief had no other choice. The guy said that the number of different factions would grow when the kingdom was properly founded, and therefore everything would repeat itself. The angel thought that the guy was wrong because what was the point in saving and developing the state if the same situations continued? The main character thought that he also thought so, but it was not his fault that he ended up here and had to worry about it. After that, the guy said that the pontiff was a corrupt man, and if it weren't for him, he and Yul Yong would have pocketed every last coin for themselves. Angel reminded that it was 30 years ago. The main character replied that it didn't matter whether sins could be passed on by inheritance, but the girl objected because the Mother of God said that no one was born sinful. Chief Bilua reported that her moon tribe was facing internal and external problems. So she decided to keep the boy close to her. She assigned him to the royal commander Shiv and ordered him to immediately report any impending danger to him. The main character immediately obeyed and promised to do everything in his power to help the dear leader. After some time, the main character arrived at the training camp where the royal guards were practicing. Shivu was surprised that the child was assigned to serve here. The guy confirmed this and said that it was the leader's decision. Hearing that this was an order from the ruler, Shivu resigned himself to it, although it was clear that he did not like this idea. After that, the man showed the spear and said that he would teach the guy the basics of self-defense. The main character thought that Shivu was much kinder than he thought. The man seemed to read the boy's thoughts and told him not to be mistaken because he taught him only because it was shameful that his servants did not know how to handle weapons. Suddenly, the tip of a spear quickly approached the protagonist's face. The man continued to say that he simply wanted to make sure that the boy's abilities, which the leader valued so much, would not fall into the hands of the enemies. The main character thought that Shivu was not as good as the commander of the Silver Moon Guard, but nevertheless, he was not bad, and there was no doubt about his abilities. Suddenly, the man suggested that the boy repeat several techniques with the spear. The main character timidly took the weapon in his hands and tried to repeat the movement that had just been shown to him, but he failed. Then the man advised to first make sure that the guy was standing firmly on the ground and then lunge forward, imagining that an arrow should fly out of the tip of the spear. The main character continued to train, but he still couldn't do it. Mentally, he scolded his teacher and didn't understand how he was supposed to repeat it. Suddenly, he remembered that he had the skill of wielding a spear, which he received as a reward for completing the previous mission. Sivu said that the guy would have to train for several weeks to first learn the correct stance. The next moment, the protagonist activated his spear skill and lunged forward as if he had been holding a weapon in his hands all his life. After that, he looked at Siva and didn't ask if he was doing everything right. The man thought for a bit and asked suspiciously if the guy had never held a spear in his hands before. The main character replied that it just seemed to him that it would be right. The man was very surprised by this answer and thought that the guy had talent. Some more time passed. Shivu again asked the guy not to be mistaken. The main character thought that this was the man's favorite phrase. The man said that everyone knew how to use a spear, so it was difficult to call it a weapon. So he suggested developing other skills and starting with an axe. The next moment, the protagonist activated his axe skill and threw the weapon, hitting the target straight away. The man said that it was impressive, but here the guy was not satisfied with just one feeling, so he gave him a wooden sword and ordered him to follow him. The protagonist used his abilities again, but this time he activated the skill of wielding a wooden sword. Sivu admitted that the guy had a certain talent, but the bow was a completely different matter, so he suggested starting to master this weapon, although it would be difficult. In order to pull the bowstring, the guy used the craftsman's skill without thinking. Sivu was very surprised and said that the guy was quite skilled despite the fact that he was a slave. After this, the main character used his bow skill and demonstrated his skills to the man. After thinking for a bit, Sivu said that it was completely unclear to him why such a skilled guy was carrying stones. The main character replied that all this was due to hostility towards people like him. Shivu admitted that the guy was strong enough to defend himself but asked him not to be mistaken, because this only meant that he was the same as any other man. After that, The man asked if the guy wanted to continue practicing martial arts, but the main character replied that it was enough, and he did not want to surpass his teacher. The guy thought it was just funny that his direct descendant of a traitor was taught self-defense, although he understood the reason why they did it. He remembered how he once made newcomers memorize the scriptures at the Tahak Academy. The guy understood that Sivu wanted to teach him more because he did so well. The boy continued to think that the elders could not do anything about it because they wanted to help the young people who were smarter and more capable. The main character regretted that all his students ran away when the time of danger came. So now he felt that raising newbies was a real waste of time. Shivu thought about what would happen if the guy wanted to become a warrior. The main character was surprised that not long ago the man said that he was nobody, and now he was happy about his success. Then the guy suggested finishing training for today. He thought that his skills were only level 1, so he needed to stop. Sivu did not object and agreed with this. The guy assumed that the man had already opened up to him a little. After this, the main character said that all this time he was just carrying stones, so he absolutely did not know what was happening. He asked to tell him what situation the Moon Tribe was in now. The man thought for a moment, and then asked if the boy couldn't figure it out himself with his powers of foresight. The guy replied that he wasn't that good at controlling this power, and that in order to succeed, he needed to know as much as possible. The man said that the tribe had internal and external problems. Internal problems included the followers of the devil and the safety of the chief. Sivu continued to say that Natua and Al-Shilla, together with their delegations, were involved in external problems. The main character was surprised to hear these names. Sivu said that not many records about these ancient countries had been preserved. The man only knew that Natuak had well-developed maritime trade, and Al-Shilla was famous for its metal plug, and therefore had close ties with people who were not deprived of great physical strength. The main character knew that in 100 years these countries would unite. The technical kingdom will be formed after the unification of these 3 countries, because then the kingdom will establish clear systems and foundations. Then the countdown of history will begin. The man continued to say that the main and most important problem was the safety of the leader and the delegation of the 2 countries. The protagonist assumed that there were some problems associated with this. The man said that Nachua sent the second prince to the Moon Tribe, while Al-Shilla sent the king's younger brother. The main characters were surprised that the delegates were of such a high status, and immediately thought that such people were not sent to solve diplomatic problems. Suddenly the boy realized that this was connected with the leader. Sivu confirmed this and said that she did not have a family yet, and therefore the king sent possible candidates for a marriage of convenience. Hearing this, the main character immediately became nervous, because it turned out that the leader of the Moon Tribe now did not have a single successor. The guy began to calculate the leader's age and realized that she was 40-something or even 50 years old. He was afraid that she would not be able to have a child. The main character was nervous because the Silver Moon clan could disappear without even appearing. Having calmed down a little, the guy asked which of the 2 delegates the leader Sivu would prefer. He answered that neither would he. The man explained that the country's intentions were obvious, and they wanted to subjugate the Moon Tribe under the pretext of a wedding. The main character thought that the kings of neighboring states were waiting for Belua to die without leaving a single heir. The guy also suggested that they could get rid of the leader immediately after marriage in order to preserve the appearance of the Moon Tribe. The protagonist agreed with the man, saying that the leader should not choose either side. Shivu asked if the guy was really predicting the future. The main character confirmed this and explained that if the leader chose someone, a gloomy future awaited her. After that, the guy activated the prediction skill. Sivu immediately believed everything that was said. The main character thought that he had always been sure that the prediction was needed so that people would hear what they wanted. After that, the guy grabbed his head and said that the leader should have married someone from the Moon Tribe, because then the future would be served as it should. He also added that it had to be the person closest to her, because the guy clearly saw a picture of joy. The main character immediately thought about Siva, because he was a young, loyal commander who was dedicated to his cause and had no connection with politics. The next moment, the guy pretended that he suddenly felt ill, from which he began to fall to the ground. Shivu had excellent reflexes and therefore immediately caught the guy and carefully laid him on his back. The main character was breathing heavily and asked Mr. Siva to listen to him. The guy seemed nervous. He kept repeating that he saw something. The main character said that he saw the man who would be chosen by the leader in the future and whom she would marry. Sivu began to listen attentively to the guy. The man was impatient to get an answer, so he grabbed the guy by the shoulders and began to shake him, asking who Bilyua had chosen. The main character timidly answered that this chosen one was Mr. Sivu. The man was immediately taken aback by what he heard, and the system window reported that the prediction worked perfectly for him, although he had never spoken to Bilyua about it. Shivu looked at the ground and said with regret that he knew about it.